Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I've got a collection of stories that are honestly going to make you feel a whole lot better about your own family situation. We're diving into some truly unhinged, entitled parent stories that'll have you questioning how some people function as adults, let alone raise kids. I know life can be stressful, and sometimes you just need to unwind with some good old-fashioned internet drama. There's something oddly therapeutic about hearing these wild tales of family dysfunction that makes your own problems seem pretty manageable by comparison. So grab whatever you're doing, get comfortable, and let's jump into some stories that'll make you appreciate reasonable boundaries and basic human decency. These are all fresh from the depths of Reddit, where people share their most jaw-dropping family experiences. Fair warning though, some of these are going to make your blood boil, but in the best possible way. Sometimes you need that little spark of righteous anger to remind you that standing up for yourself isn't just okay, it's necessary. Our first story comes from someone who learned the hard way that working toward your dreams doesn't always get family support. My entitled mum demanded I give her my college savings. I'm 18 and I've been working since I was 15 to save money for college. I have a job at a local restaurant where I work nights and weekends, and I've been putting every dollar I can into my savings account. Over the past 3 years, I've managed to save up about $12,000, which I know isn't enough to cover everything, but it's a solid start toward my education. My mum has always known about my college fund. She used to be proud of my work ethic and would brag to her friends about how responsible I was being. She'd tell people how I was going to be the first person in our family to go to college and how excited she was for my future. That all changed last month when my mum's car broke down. The repair estimate came back at $3,500 and she didn't have the money to fix it. She needs the car to get to work, so it wasn't like she could just ignore the problem. At first I felt bad for her and even offered to lend her a few $100s to help with the repair costs. But that's not what she wanted. She sat me down and told me she needed me to give her the entire $12,000 from my college savings. She said the car was more important than my education right now, because without it, she couldn't work and support our family. She kept saying, family comes first, and that I was being selfish by hoarding money when she was struggling. I told her I couldn't give her all my college money. I explained that I'd worked incredibly hard for that money, and that it represented 3 years of sacrifice. I offered again to help with part of the repair costs, but I couldn't give up my entire future for her car problems. My mum completely lost it. She started screaming about how ungrateful I was and how she'd sacrificed everything to raise me. She said that after everything she'd done for me, the least I could do was help her when she needed it most. She claimed that I could always save up more money for college, but she needed the car fixed right now. When I still refused, she tried a different approach. She said that since I was living under her roof and eating her food, the money I'd earned wasn't really mine anyway. She argued that she'd been supporting me for 18 years, and now it was time for me to support her. She even suggested that maybe I didn't need to go to college at all, since I was already working and making money. The whole situation got worse when she started involving other family members. She called my aunt and told her that I was refusing to help with a family emergency. She made it sound like I was sitting on a pile of money while she suffered, conveniently leaving out the part about it being my college savings that I'd worked years to accumulate. My aunt called me and tried to guilt me into giving my mum the money. She said that family should stick together and that my education could wait. She told me I was being stubborn and that I'd regret not helping my mum when she needed me most. Even my younger brother got involved. My mum must have told him some version of the story because he came to me asking why I wouldn't help mum with her car. He's only 14 and doesn't really understand the situation, but seeing him look at me like I was the bad guy really hurt. The pressure from everyone was overwhelming. I started to doubt myself and wonder if maybe I was being selfish. Maybe family really should come first. Maybe I could find another way to pay for college later. But every time I thought about handing over that money, I remembered all the late nights I'd worked, all the social events I'd missed, all the things I'd given up to save for my future. I decided to stick to my decision. I told my mum that I would help her find other solutions for the car repair, but I wasn't giving up my college savings. I offered to help her look into payment plans with the mechanic, or maybe she could ask the bank for a small loan. I even suggested she could ask other family members to help if it was really such an emergency. My mum was furious. She said I was dead to her and that she never wanted to see me again. She told me that when I needed help someday, I shouldn't come crying to her because she wouldn't be there. She said I'd chosen money over family and that I'd have to live with that choice. That was 2 weeks ago, and she's barely spoken to me since. She makes passive-aggressive comments about how some children appreciate their parents and how she wishes she'd raised me better. The whole house feels tense and uncomfortable. I ended up moving in with my dad temporarily because the situation at home became unbearable. My mum told everyone that I'd abandoned the family when they needed me most. She's been posting on social media about how hard it is to be a single mother with ungrateful children. The worst part is that she still hasn't fixed her car. Instead of looking into other solutions, she's just been complaining about how I ruined everything by being selfish. She's been taking the bus to work and making sure everyone knows it's because her awful daughter wouldn't help her. I feel guilty every day, but I also know that giving up my college savings would have destroyed my future. I've worked too hard to just throw it all away because of her poor financial planning. I start college in the fall, and I'm excited about my future, but the family drama has definitely put a damper on what should be a happy time. Some of my friends think I did the right thing, while others think I should have helped my mum. I keep going back and forth about whether I'm a terrible daughter, or if I made the right choice by protecting my future. That story ends there, and honestly, this is exactly why financial boundaries are so important with family. OP worked for 3 years to save that money, and their mum tried to guilt them into throwing away their entire future over a car repair. The fact that she involved other family members and tried to manipulate a 14-year-old into pressuring OP shows exactly the kind of person she is. It's heartbreaking that OP had to choose between family harmony and their dreams, but they absolutely made the right call protecting their education fund. Let's move on to another story about parents who seem to think their older children exist solely to serve the younger ones. My dad tried to kick me out for not babysitting his new kids. I'm 19 and still living at home while I go to community college. My dad remarried 3 years ago to a woman named Sandra, who has 2 young kids from her previous marriage, ages 5 and 7. They also had a baby together last year, so now there are 3 little kids in the house. When my dad first got together with Sandra, he made a big deal about how we were going to be one big happy family. He said that meant everyone would need to pitch in and help out with the younger kids. At first, I didn't mind helping occasionally. I'd watch them for an hour here or there when needed, or help with homework sometimes. But over time, the expectations kept growing. What started as occasional babysitting turned into a regular expectation that I'd be available whenever they needed childcare. Sandra would make plans assuming I'd watch the kids, and my dad would get angry if I had other commitments. The breaking point came last weekend when I had plans to go to a concert with my friends. I'd bought the tickets 2 months ago and had been looking forward to it for weeks. It was a band I'd been wanting to see for years, and this was their first time coming to our city. On Friday night, my dad told me I couldn't go to the concert because Sandra's babysitter had cancelled and they had dinner reservations that couldn't be changed. He said it was my duty as the oldest child to help out when the family needed me. He acted like it was completely reasonable to expect me to cancel my plans with less than 24 hours notice. I told him I wasn't available to babysit because I already had plans. I reminded him that I'd bought the tickets months ago and that this wasn't a last-minute thing on my part. I suggested they could reschedule their dinner or find another babysitter. My dad got furious and said that family obligations come before social activities. He said that as long as I was living under his roof, I needed to contribute to the household, and that included watching my siblings when needed. He kept calling them my siblings, even though they're really my step-siblings and half-sibling. Sandra jumped in and said she was disappointed in my selfishness. She talked about how hard it was to be a working mother with 3 young children and how she needed support from the family. She said that in her previous marriage, everyone pitched in to help with childcare, and that's just how families work. I pointed out that I do help out regularly, but that doesn't mean I should have to cancel my own plans whenever they need a babysitter. I said they were the parents, and it was their responsibility to arrange childcare, not mine. I reminded them that I'm a full-time student with my own life and commitments. My dad said I was being disrespectful and ungrateful. He started listing all the things he does for me, like letting me live at home and paying for my phone bill. He said that if I wanted to act like an independent adult, maybe I should move out and pay my own way. I told him that was fine with me and that I'd start looking for a place to live. I said I'd rather pay rent somewhere else than be treated like a live-in nanny who has to cancel her plans whenever it's convenient for them. That's when my dad really exploded. He said I had 30 days to find somewhere else to live, since I clearly didn't want to be part of the family. He said that if I wasn't willing to help out with the kids, then there was no point in me living there. Sandra was nodding along and adding comments about how some people don't appreciate what they have. I ended up going to the concert anyway and had an amazing time with my friends. But the whole night, I was stressed about the situation at home. When I got back, my dad and Sandra were giving me the silent treatment. The next day, my dad handed me a written notice saying I had 30 days to vacate the premises. He'd actually typed up an official-looking document like I was a tenant being evicted. At the bottom, he'd written that if I changed my attitude about family responsibilities, we could discuss me staying. I called my mum, who I don't live with because she lives in a tiny apartment, but she was horrified by the whole situation. She said that while it's nice for older kids to help out sometimes, parents shouldn't expect their adult children to be free babysitters. She offered to let me sleep on her couch temporarily while I figured things out. Some of my friends at school have offered to let me stay with them, and I'm looking into getting a small apartment with roommates. The whole situation has been really stressful because I wasn't planning to move out right now, and I don't have a lot of money saved up. The worst part is that my dad is acting like I'm the one who broke up the family. He's been telling relatives that I chose to move out because I didn't want to help with the kids. He's not mentioning the part where he gave me an ultimatum and basically kicked me out for having plans on one weekend. Sandra has been posting on Facebook about how hard it is when older children don't want to be part of the family and how some people are just naturally selfish. She's getting sympathy from her friends who don't know the full story. My little half-brother, who's still a baby, doesn't understand what's happening, but the stepkids have been asking why I'm moving out. Sandra told them it's because I don't want to live with them anymore, which made the 5-year-old cry. I tried to explain that it's more complicated than that, but it's hard to explain adult problems to young kids. I'm supposed to be out by next weekend, and I'm still scrambling to find a permanent place to live. Part of me is excited about the independence, but I'm also sad about how everything went down. I never wanted to hurt the relationship with my dad, but I also couldn't keep being treated like free childcare. Some people have told me I should apologise and try to work things out, but I don't think I did anything wrong by having plans and refusing to cancel them. Other people say I should have been more flexible since they were in a bind with the babysitter cancelling. I keep wondering if there was a better way to handle the whole situation, but I also feel like my dad and Sandra were being completely unreasonable. They created this expectation that I'd always be available to babysit, and when I finally said no to something important to me, they decided I wasn't worth having around. The story ends there, and this is just infuriating on so many levels. OP's dad literally kicked them out for having the audacity to attend a concert they'd planned for months. The entitlement of expecting your adult child to drop everything and provide free babysitting is staggering. And then turning it around, like OP abandoned the family when they're the ones who issued an ultimatum. The manipulation of telling the younger kids that OP doesn't want to live with them is just cruel. Sometimes parents forget their older children are actual people with their own lives, not unpaid employees. Here's another story about parents who think everything their child earns belongs to the family. My mum insisted I share my car with my brother. I'm 17 and I just bought my first car with money I earned working at a local grocery store for the past 2 years. I saved every penny I could, working extra shifts on weekends and holidays, and finally had enough to buy a decent used Honda Civic. It's not fancy, but it's mine, and I'm incredibly proud of it. My younger brother Jake is 15 and has been begging our parents for a car since he got his learner's permit. He keeps talking about all the places he wants to go and how unfair it is that he has to wait until he can save up his own money. The problem is, Jake has never held a job and spends any money he gets on video games and fast food. The day after I brought my car home, my mum sat me down for what she called a family meeting. She explained that it wasn't fair for only one child to have access to a car when both of us needed transportation. She said that since we're both her children, the car should be shared equally between Jake and me. I reminded her that I had paid for the car entirely with my own money. I showed her all the pay stubs and bank statements proving that every dollar came from my job at the grocery store. I explained that I had worked specifically to save money for this car and that Jake could do the same if he wanted his own vehicle. My mum said that didn't matter because we're family and family shares everything. She pointed out that she and my dad share their cars, so Jake and I should do the same. She said it would teach us both about cooperation and that I was being selfish by wanting to keep the car to myself. She then laid out her plan for how the sharing would work. Jake would get the car on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, while I would get it on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Sundays would be family car day, where we'd have to ask permission to use it. She acted like this was a perfectly reasonable compromise. I told her absolutely not. I explained that I needed the car to get to my job, and I couldn't risk Jake having it on days when I had to work. I also pointed out that Jake doesn't have a driver's license yet, so he legally can't even drive the car. My mum said he'd have his license soon enough, and that I needed to think about what's best for the whole family. When I refused to agree to her sharing plan, my mum got angry. She said I was being incredibly selfish and that she was disappointed in how ungrateful I was. She reminded me that she and my dad had fed, clothed, and housed me for 17 years, and the least I could do was share my car with my brother. My dad got involved and tried a different approach. He said that while he understood I had paid for the car, I was still a minor living under their roof. He suggested that since they were responsible for me, they had some say in how I used expensive items like cars. He said sharing with Jake would be good practice for real-world cooperation. Jake, of course, was completely on board with their plan. He kept talking about all the places we could go together and how much fun it would be to share the car. He didn't seem to understand that sharing meant I'd lose access to something I had worked 2 years to afford. He just saw it as getting a free car without having to work for it. The situation got worse when my mum started involving extended family. She told my grandmother about the car situation and made it sound like I was hoarding something from my poor younger brother. My grandmother called me and suggested that maybe I should be more generous with Jake since he's younger and needs guidance. My mum also started making passive-aggressive comments about how some children think only of themselves. She'd make remarks about how disappointed she was that I hadn't learned to share better, and how she'd failed as a parent if I couldn't be generous with my own brother. The final straw came when I found Jake sitting in my car with the keys, trying to figure out how to start it. My mum had given him the spare key I kept in the kitchen and told him he could practice driving in the driveway. When I caught him, he said Mum had told him the car belonged to both of us now. I took the keys away from Jake and told my parents that I was keeping both sets of keys with me at all times. I said that since I had paid for the car, I was the only one who would decide when and how it was used. I offered to give Jake rides places when I could, but I wasn't turning over half ownership of something I had worked so hard for. My mum was furious and said I was being ridiculously stubborn. She threatened to take away other privileges like my phone or internet access if I didn't start cooperating with the family sharing plan. She said that if I wanted to act like an adult with my own possessions. Maybe I should move out and see how hard the real world actually is. I ended up having to park my car at my friend's house and walk there whenever I needed to use it. It was inconvenient, but it was the only way to keep my parents from giving Jake access to it. My mum was angry about this arrangement and said I was being dramatic and childish. The whole situation has created a lot of tension in our house. Jake is mad at me for not sharing. My parents think I'm being selfish, and I feel like I'm being punished for working hard and saving money. Some of my friends think I should just let Jake use the car sometimes, while others say my parents are being completely unreasonable. I've started looking into what my options are for when I turn 18. I'm hoping to move out as soon as I graduate high school, but that's still over a year away. Until then, I'm stuck dealing with my parents trying to redistribute my possessions in the name of family fairness. The worst part is that this has made me not want to work toward other goals. If my parents are just going to take or redistribute anything nice that I earn, what's the point of working hard? I'm worried that this attitude toward my belongings will extend to other things like college money or future jobs. I keep wondering if I'm being too stubborn about this, but I also feel like giving in would set a precedent that nothing I earn really belongs to me. It's my car that I paid for with my own money, and I shouldn't have to share it just because my brother wants access to it too. That story just makes my blood boil, because OP literally worked for 2 years to buy that car, and their mum decided it should belong to both kids equally. The entitlement of thinking you can just redistribute your child's property because family shares everything is unreal. And then trying to guilt OP by bringing up years of basic parenting like feeding and housing them. That's what parents are supposed to do. It doesn't create a debt that kids have to repay by giving up everything they work for. The fact that they gave the spare key to the 15-year-old who doesn't even have a license shows how little respect they have for OP's property. Moving on to another story about parents who seem to think their children's paychecks belong to the household. My entitled parents demanded I hand over my paychecks. I'm 16 and I got my first job 4 months ago working at a local pizza place. I was really excited about finally having my own money and being able to save up for things I wanted. The job isn't glamorous, I mostly do dishes and prep work, but I like having something that's mine and feeling more independent. When I first started working, my parents seemed proud of me for taking initiative and getting a job. They talked about how it would teach me responsibility and the value of hard work. They helped me open my own checking account, and everything seemed normal. The problem started after I got my first few paychecks. I was making about $400 every 2 weeks, which felt like a fortune to me. I put most of it in my savings account, but spent a little on things I wanted, like new headphones and some clothes. I thought this was exactly what having a job was supposed to be like. But then my dad lost his job unexpectedly. He worked in construction, and the company he was with went out of business with very little notice. Suddenly our family went from having 2 incomes to just my mum's salary from her office job. Money got tight really quickly. That's when my parents sat me down and explained that I needed to start contributing more to the household. They said that since I was earning money now, I should help out with family expenses. At first, this seemed reasonable to me. I offered to pay for my own phone bill and maybe help with groceries sometimes. But that's not what they had in mind. My dad told me that I needed to hand over my entire paycheck every 2 weeks to help the family get through this difficult time. He said that once he found another job, we could revisit the arrangement. But for now, every dollar I earned needed to go toward household expenses. I was shocked. I asked if I could at least keep a small portion of my paycheck for myself, maybe $50 or $100. I explained that I had been saving up for a laptop for school and that I still wanted to be able to buy small things for myself occasionally. I thought this was a reasonable compromise. My mum said that wasn't how family works. She explained that when one family member is struggling, everyone needs to pitch in to help. She said that my $400 every 2 weeks could make a huge difference in whether we could pay all our bills on time. She made it sound like I would be selfish and heartless not to help. When I hesitated, my dad got angry. He started listing all the things they pay for that benefit me: housing, food, electricity, water, internet, my phone, car insurance, for when I drive their car. He said that I'd been living off their money for 16 years, and now it was time for me to contribute back to the family. I tried to explain that I understood they were going through a hard time, but that taking my entire paycheck felt unfair. I said I'd be happy to contribute a portion of my earnings, but I wanted to keep some money for myself. I reminded them that I was working hard for that money, and that it would be discouraging to have to give up every penny. My parents said I was being selfish and ungrateful. They pointed out that other families in financial trouble would expect their working children to help out. My mum started crying and talking about how stressed she was about money and how disappointed she was that I wouldn't help when the family needed me most. The emotional manipulation was intense. They made me feel like I was single-handedly destroying our family's financial stability by wanting to keep any of my paycheck. They said that if I really loved them, I would gladly hand over my earnings to help everyone get through this crisis. Eventually, I caved and agreed to give them my paychecks. I told myself it was temporary, and that once my dad found work again, things would go back to normal. I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing by helping my family during a tough time. But weeks turned into months, and my dad still hadn't found steady work. He was picking up occasional day jobs, but nothing consistent. Meanwhile, I was working 20 to 25 hours a week and handing over every penny to my parents. I wasn't able to save anything or buy anything for myself. The worst part was that I started to notice my parents weren't being as careful with money as they claimed they needed to be. My mum was still getting her nails done every few weeks, and my dad bought a new set of golf clubs. When I asked about these purchases, they said they deserved small luxuries after all the stress they'd been under. I also noticed that they weren't really including me in decisions about how the money was spent. They'd tell me we were behind on the electric bill, but then I'd see them ordering takeout multiple times a week. It started to feel like my paycheck was just being absorbed into their regular spending rather than actually helping with essential expenses. When I tried to bring up these concerns, my parents got defensive. They said I didn't understand how adult expenses work, and that I should be grateful they were teaching me about financial responsibility. They accused me of trying to control how they spent money when I was just a teenager who didn't understand real-world finances. The situation got even worse when I realised they had been using my checking account for their own expenses. Since I was a minor, they were joint account holders, and I discovered they had been writing checks from my account and using my debit card. They were essentially treating my bank account like it was their own money. When I confronted them about this, they said it was more convenient than constantly transferring money around. They acted like I was being unreasonable for being upset that they were accessing my account without telling me. They said that since they were my parents, they had every right to manage my finances. I started to feel like I was working just to fund my parents' lifestyle while getting nothing for myself. I was putting in 20+ hours a week at a job I didn't particularly love, and I had nothing to show for it. My savings account had stopped growing, and I couldn't even buy small things I wanted. The breaking point came when my dad finally got a new job. I was excited because I thought this meant I could start keeping my paychecks again. But when I brought it up, my parents said they'd gotten used to the extra income and thought I should continue contributing to the household. They said I was still living at home and benefiting from their support, so it made sense for me to help with expenses. They acted like taking my entire paycheck had become the new normal, rather than a temporary arrangement during their financial emergency. I realised that if I didn't stand up for myself, I'd be working for free for the rest of high school. I told my parents that I wanted to start keeping at least half of my paycheck since my dad was working again. I said I'd still be happy to contribute to household expenses, but I needed some money for myself. My parents were furious. They said I was being greedy and selfish after they'd supported me for so many years. They threatened to take away privileges like my phone and internet access if I didn't continue handing over my full paycheck. They said that as long as I was living under their roof, my earnings belonged to the family. I ended up having to hide money from my paychecks and lie about how much I was making. I started cashing my checks instead of depositing them and keeping the money hidden in my room. It felt terrible to have to sneak around, but it was the only way to have any money for myself. The whole situation has made me eager to move out as soon as I turn 18. I've lost a lot of trust in my parents, and I don't feel like they respect me as an individual. They seem to view me more as a source of income than as their child with my own needs and goals. This story ends with OP basically having to steal from their own paychecks just to keep some of their earnings. The parents went from a temporary emergency to permanently treating their teenager like a cash cow. And the nerve of them spending money on nails and golf clubs while claiming they desperately needed every penny of OP's paycheck is just disgusting. Taking a minor's entire paycheck and then accessing their bank accounts without permission crosses so many lines. These parents turned their child into an unpaid family ATM and then got mad when OP wanted basic financial autonomy. Let's dive into another story about parents who think geography should revolve around their convenience. My dad told me I shouldn't go to college out of state. I'm 18 and I just got accepted to my dream college in California. I live in Ohio, so it's definitely a big move, but this school has one of the best programs in the country for what I want to study. I've worked incredibly hard throughout high school to get the grades and test scores needed for admission, and getting accepted felt like the biggest achievement of my life. When I first told my parents about applying to out-of-state schools, they seemed supportive. They talked about how proud they were of my academic achievements and how excited they were to see me pursue higher education. My dad even helped me with some of the application essays and seemed genuinely interested in my college plans. But when the acceptance letter arrived, everything changed. Instead of celebrating with me, my dad sat me down for a serious conversation about why going to California would be a huge mistake. He started listing all the reasons I should stay closer to home and attend one of the local universities instead. His first argument was financial. He pointed out that out-of-state tuition was significantly more expensive than staying in Ohio, and he said the family couldn't afford to help me with the higher costs. He showed me calculations about how much debt I'd graduate with and tried to convince me it wasn't worth it. I explained that I had researched all of this extensively and had already secured financial aid and scholarships that would cover most of the costs. I had also been working part-time and saving money to help with expenses. I showed him that the financial burden wouldn't be as severe as he was making it seem, but then he revealed what was really bothering him. He said it was selfish of me to move so far away when the family needed me here. He explained that my grandparents were getting older and might need help, and that my younger sister would miss having me around during her final years of high school. My dad went on to say that family should stick together and that moving across the country showed I didn't value our relationships. He said that if I really cared about my family, I'd choose to stay closer to home, where I could visit regularly and be available when needed. He also brought up practical concerns about being so far away. He asked what would happen if there was a family emergency, and I was thousands of miles away. He painted pictures of scenarios where I'd miss important family events or wouldn't be able to help when my parents or grandparents needed support. When I tried to explain that this was an incredible opportunity that I might never get again, he dismissed my arguments. He said there were perfectly good schools in Ohio and that I was just being dramatic about needing to go to California. He acted like wanting to attend my dream school was just a childish whim rather than a serious academic decision. My mum initially seemed more understanding, but she gradually started agreeing with my dad. She talked about how much she'd miss me and how hard it would be to have me so far away. She said she'd been looking forward to having me nearby during college so we could still see each other regularly. The emotional manipulation escalated when my dad started involving other family members. He told my grandparents about my college plans and encouraged them to call me with their concerns about me moving so far away. Suddenly, I was getting calls from relatives telling me how worried they were about me being across the country. My younger sister also got pulled into the situation. My dad told her that I was planning to abandon the family and move far away where I wouldn't be able to help her or spend time with her. She started crying and asking me why I wanted to leave her behind. The pressure from everyone was overwhelming. My dad kept scheduling meetings with me to discuss alternative options and would present me with brochures from local colleges. He'd point out all their good qualities and try to convince me that staying in Ohio was the smarter choice. He also started making comments about how disappointed he was in my decision-making. He'd say things like he thought he'd raised me to value family over personal ambition, and that he was surprised I'd be willing to hurt everyone who loved me just to go to a fancy school. The worst part was when he threatened to withdraw his financial support entirely if I insisted on going to California. He said that if I was determined to make such a selfish choice, I'd have to figure out how to pay for everything myself. He acted like cutting me off financially was just a natural consequence of my poor decision. I tried to compromise by suggesting I could come home for all holidays and summers, and that we could video chat regularly to stay connected. I explained that this wasn't about not loving my family, but about pursuing the best education possible for my career goals. But my dad wasn't interested in compromises. He said that if I really understood what family meant, I wouldn't even consider moving so far away. He kept repeating that children have obligations to their parents, and that part of those obligations included staying geographically close enough to help when needed. My mum started crying during one of these conversations and said she felt like she was losing me. She talked about how she'd imagined us having lunch together during my college years, and how devastating it would be to only see me a few times a year. She made it sound like going to California was equivalent to cutting them out of my life entirely. I began to second-guess myself and wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was being selfish by wanting to move so far away. Maybe family should come first and I should choose a good local school instead of pursuing my dream program across the country. But every time I thought about giving up this opportunity, I felt sick to my stomach. I'd worked so hard to get into this program, and I knew it could open doors that might never be available to me otherwise. I also realized that if I gave in now, my parents would expect me to make all my major life decisions based on their convenience, rather than my own goals. I decided to stick with my plan to attend college in California. I told my parents that I appreciated their concerns, but that this was my decision to make. I explained that I'd do everything I could to stay connected with the family, but that I needed to pursue this educational opportunity. My dad was furious and said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. He told me that when I was struggling on my own across the country, I shouldn't expect him to bail me out. He said I was choosing to be independent, so I'd better be prepared to handle everything myself. The relationship with my parents has been strained ever since. They're still speaking to me, but there's definitely tension whenever college comes up. They make passive-aggressive comments about how much they'll miss me and how different things will be with me gone. I'm excited about starting college, but I'm also sad that what should be a celebratory time has become a source of family conflict. I wish my parents could be happy for me instead of making me feel guilty for pursuing my dreams. Some of my friends think I should have just stayed local to keep peace in the family, while others say my parents are being manipulative and controlling. I keep going back and forth about whether I'm making the right choice, but I know I'd regret not taking this opportunity. That story really shows how some parents think their children exist to serve the family's needs rather than pursue their own dreams. OP earned admission to their dream school through hard work and even secured financial aid, but their dad decided it was selfish to move away. The manipulation of involving grandparents and the younger sister to guilt OP into staying is particularly cruel, and threatening to cut off financial support because your child wants to get the best education possible. That's not parenting, that's control. OP absolutely made the right choice pursuing their dreams instead of staying local to be their family's backup plan. Here's our next story about a parent who decided to stop being a parent and dump all responsibilities on their teenager. My mum expected me to do all the cooking at 15. I'm 17 now, but this started when I was 15. My mum decided she was done cooking for the family and announced that it was now my responsibility to handle all the meals. She said she'd been cooking for over 20 years and deserved a break. And since I was the oldest kid still living at home, the job fell to me. At first, I thought she was joking or maybe just going through a phase. My mum had always been the one to cook dinner and make sure we had food in the house. She wasn't an amazing cook, but she managed to feed our family of 5 every night. I figured, after a few days of ordering pizza, she'd get back to her normal routine. But she was completely serious. She stopped grocery shopping, stopped meal planning, and would just sit in the living room watching TV while dinner time came and went. When my younger siblings would ask what was for dinner, she'd point to me and say, "Ask your sister, she's in charge of food now." I had no idea how to cook for a whole family. I could make basic things like sandwiches and heat up frozen meals, but I'd never planned a weekly menu or cooked actual dinners before. I started trying to figure it out on my own, watching YouTube videos and asking my friends' mums for advice. The hardest part was that I was still expected to keep up with school, my part-time job, and all my other responsibilities. Now I also had to figure out what everyone wanted to eat, make grocery lists, and somehow find time to actually cook meals. It was overwhelming and exhausting. My mum would criticize everything I made, but wouldn't offer to help or teach me anything. If I made spaghetti, she'd complain that the sauce was too bland. If I tried to make chicken, she'd say it was overcooked. But she never stepped in to show me how to do it better or offered any constructive advice. When I asked her to help me learn some basic recipes or at least give me some guidance, she said I needed to figure it out myself because that's how life works. She said she'd learned to cook by trial and error when she got married, and I could do the same thing now. My younger siblings started complaining too. My 12-year-old brother would whine that he missed mum's cooking and that my food wasn't as good. My 10-year-old sister would refuse to eat what I made and demand that I make her something different. I felt like I was failing everyone. The grocery shopping became a nightmare because I had no idea how much food to buy or what ingredients went together. I'd spend forever in the store trying to plan meals for the week, and I'd usually forget something important or buy too much of things we didn't need. My mum would get angry if I spent too much money on groceries, but she also wouldn't give me any guidance about budgeting for food. She'd just hand me cash and tell me to figure it out. Sometimes I'd run out of money before I could buy everything we needed, and then she'd get mad that there wasn't enough food in the house. The worst part was that I was still expected to do my regular chores, on top of all the cooking. I had to clean the kitchen after making meals, do dishes, and keep up with laundry and cleaning my room. It felt like I was doing the work of an adult, while still being treated like a child in every other way. When I complained about how unfair the situation was, my mum said I was being dramatic and ungrateful. She pointed out that she'd been cooking and cleaning for years without complaining, and that it was time for me to contribute more to the household. She said learning to cook was a valuable life skill that would benefit me later. My dad didn't really get involved in the situation. When I tried to talk to him about it, he said that mum was probably just stressed, and that helping out with cooking was a reasonable thing for me to do. He didn't seem to understand that she'd completely stopped participating in meal planning and preparation. The situation got worse when my mum started inviting friends over for dinner and expecting me to cook for them too. She'd give me a few hours' notice that we were having guests and that I needed to make something nice. I'd panic trying to figure out how to make enough food for extra people and make it look presentable. One time she invited her book club over and told them that I'd be making homemade lasagna for everyone. I'd never made lasagna before in my life, and it was a complete disaster. The noodles were overcooked, the cheese didn't melt right, and it looked awful. I was so embarrassed in front of all her friends. My mum acted like it was my fault for not being a better cook, even though she'd never taught me how to make lasagna or given me any advance warning about what she expected. Her friends were polite, but I could tell they thought it was weird that a 15-year-old was doing all the cooking. I started resenting meal times because they just meant more work and stress for me. I'd come home from school exhausted and know that I still had to figure out what to make for dinner and then clean up afterward. My grades started suffering because I was spending so much time on meal planning and cooking. When I tried to talk to my mum about maybe sharing the cooking responsibilities or at least helping me learn some better recipes, she said I was complaining too much. She told me that when she was my age, she was already helping her mother with all the household tasks and that kids today were too spoiled. My friends thought the whole situation was crazy. They couldn't believe that their parents had just stopped cooking and dumped all the responsibility on them. Some of them offered to help me learn new recipes, which was really sweet, but I was embarrassed that I needed help with such basic things. The breaking point came when I got food poisoning from undercooked chicken that I'd made for the family. I ended up in the emergency room and missed 3 days of school. Instead of being concerned about my health, my mum was annoyed that she had to figure out meals while I was sick. That's when I realised that this wasn't about teaching me life skills or sharing household responsibilities. My mum had just decided she didn't want to cook anymore and had found a way to make it my problem instead of hers. I started refusing to cook elaborate meals and would just make basic things like sandwiches or heat up frozen dinners. When my mum complained, I told her that if she wanted gourmet meals, she could either teach me how to make them or cook them herself. We're still dealing with this situation, but I've stopped trying to be the family chef. I'll make food for myself and my siblings when needed, but I'm not planning weekly menus or cooking for my mum's friends anymore. She can figure that out herself. That story ends there, and I'm honestly speechless at the complete abandonment of parental responsibility. A 15-year-old shouldn't be running a household kitchen and feeding the entire family while juggling school and a job. The fact that she criticised everything OP made without teaching them anything shows this was never about life skills. And expecting a teenager to cook for dinner parties? That's just using your child as unpaid household labour while you sit back and relax. Moving on to another story about parents who think they're entitled to their children's money. My parents took my birthday money every year. I'm 19 now, but this has been going on since I was probably 8 or 9 years old. Every year for my birthday, my grandparents, aunts, uncles and family friends would give me cash as presents. It was never huge amounts, but usually I'd end up with anywhere from $200 to $400 total from all my birthday gifts combined. I used to get so excited about my birthday money because it meant I could buy toys or games that I'd been wanting. I'd make lists of things I planned to purchase and would ask my parents to take me to the store so I could spend my birthday cash on something special. But every single year, the same thing would happen. My parents would collect all the money from my birthday cards and tell me they were putting it somewhere safe for me. They'd say they were going to deposit it in a savings account or keep it in a special place so I wouldn't lose it. At first, this seemed reasonable to me. I was pretty young and I probably would have lost cash if I'd been carrying it around. I trusted my parents to keep my money safe and give it back to me when I wanted to buy something. But whenever I'd ask to use my birthday money to buy something, there was always an excuse for why I couldn't access it. They'd say the money was tied up in savings, or that they'd already spent it on bills and would pay me back later, or that I didn't really need whatever I wanted to buy. As I got older, I started to realise that I never actually got to spend any of my birthday money. Year after year, I'd receive cash gifts, and year after year, my parents would take control of it, and I'd never see it again. They'd make vague promises about saving it for my future, but I never saw any evidence of this savings account. When I was around 12, I started asking more specific questions about where my money was going. I wanted to see bank statements or some kind of proof that my birthday money was actually being saved for me. My parents would get annoyed with these questions and tell me I was being ungrateful and that they were handling my finances responsibly. My mum would say things like, "We've spent thousands of dollars raising you, and you're worried about a couple $100 in birthday money? She'd make me feel guilty for even asking about money that had been given to me as gifts. My dad would get more direct and tell me that since they were supporting me, any money I received essentially belonged to the family. He'd say that my birthday money helped offset the costs of my food, clothing and housing, and that I should be grateful they were teaching me about family financial responsibility. I started to suspect that they were just using my birthday money to pay for regular household expenses. When I'd ask to buy something that cost $50 and they'd say we couldn't afford it, I'd point out that I'd received more than $50 in birthday money just a few months earlier. They'd get angry and say I was being manipulative and selfish. The worst part was that they'd never tell my relatives what was happening with the money. My grandparents would ask me what I'd bought with my birthday cash, and I'd have to make up stories or change the subject. I felt like I was lying to people who had been generous to me. When I was 14, my grandmother specifically asked me to show her something I'd bought with the $100 she'd given me for my birthday. I had to admit that I'd never actually gotten to spend the money because my parents had taken it. She was shocked and asked my parents about it directly. My mum told my grandmother that they were saving all my birthday money for college and that it was more responsible than letting me waste it on toys and junk. My grandmother seemed to accept this explanation, but she started giving me gifts instead of cash after that conversation. I realised that my parents' story about saving the money was probably a lie because they never mentioned having any college fund for me. When I started looking at colleges and asking about how we'd pay for tuition, they acted like they had no money set aside and that I'd need to figure out financial aid and student loans on my own. By the time I was 16, I was getting pretty angry about the whole situation. I'd calculated that over the years, my parents had probably taken at least $2,000 in birthday money from me. That was a significant amount of money that could have helped me buy a car or save for college expenses. I confronted them directly and asked them to account for all the birthday money they'd taken over the years. I wanted to know exactly where it had gone and whether any of it had actually been saved for my benefit. They got defensive and accused me of being greedy and materialistic. My dad said that questioning their financial decisions was disrespectful and that I should trust that they'd used the money appropriately. He said that everything they spent money on benefited the whole family, including me. So technically, my birthday money had been spent on me anyway. When I pointed out that the money had been specifically given to me as personal gifts, not as contributions to the household budget, my mum said I was being ridiculously literal. She said that in families, everything is shared, and that my birthday money was just part of our overall financial resources. I started telling my relatives not to give me cash for birthdays anymore, because my parents would just take it. This embarrassed my parents, and they got angry with me for making them look bad to the family. They said I was being dramatic and making it seem like they were stealing from me. My aunt asked me privately about the situation, and I explained what had been happening with my birthday money over the years. She was appalled and said she'd had no idea that my parents were taking money that was intended specifically for me. She started giving me gift cards instead of cash, so my parents couldn't easily take them. The situation came to a head when I turned 18 and received several generous cash gifts for my birthday. I told my parents that since I was now an adult, I'd be keeping control of my own birthday money. They were furious and said that as long as I was living under their roof, any money I received was subject to their oversight. I opened my own bank account and deposited my 18th birthday money before my parents could get their hands on it. They were livid and accused me of being sneaky and disrespectful. They said I was breaking family trust by hiding money from them. Looking back, I estimate that my parents took probably close to $3,000 in birthday money from me over the years. That money could have made a huge difference in helping me pay for college expenses or get a reliable car. Instead, it just disappeared into their regular spending, and I never saw any benefit from it. I'm now in college and struggling financially, partly because I don't have the savings that I should have accumulated from years of birthday gifts. My parents act like they don't understand why I'm upset about money that was given to me years ago, but it represents a pattern of them prioritizing their convenience over my financial independence. The birthday money situation taught me that my parents don't really respect my individual ownership of anything. They seem to view all resources that come into the household as communal property that they can redistribute however they see fit, even when those resources were specifically intended for me. That story is just infuriating because OP's relatives were trying to give them special birthday gifts, and the parents just pocketed everything for years. $3,000 stolen from birthday gifts over the years, and then they have the nerve to act like OP is being greedy for wanting their own money. The gaslighting about family financial responsibility when they were really just funding their lifestyle with their kids' gifts is disgusting. And of course they never actually saved any of it. They just wanted OP to believe that lie so they could keep taking the money guilt-free. Let's move to a story about a parent who tried to control their adult child's entire career path. My dad tried to force me into his career path. I'm 22 and just graduated college with a degree in graphic design. I've wanted to be a designer since I was in middle school and discovered that I loved creating digital art and working with visual concepts. Throughout high school and college, I put together a portfolio and worked hard to develop my skills in the field I was passionate about. My dad is an accountant who's worked at the same firm for over 20 years. He's always been successful in his career and makes good money, but he's never seemed particularly passionate about what he does. To him, work is just work, something you do to pay bills and support your family, not something that should necessarily bring you joy. From the time I was in high school, my dad started pushing me toward accounting and finance. He'd talk about how stable these careers were, and how I'd never have to worry about finding work if I had skills in numbers and business. He'd point out how much money accountants could make, and how respected they were in the business world. I tried to explain that I wasn't interested in accounting, and that my strengths were in creative areas rather than mathematics and finance. I showed him some of the design work I'd been doing, and tried to help him understand why I found it fulfilling and exciting. But my dad dismissed my artistic interests as hobbies rather than legitimate career options. He'd say things like, "Art is nice, but you can't make a living doing art." He'd bring up examples of struggling artists and designers who were barely getting by financially, and he'd warn me that creative fields were too unstable and competitive. When I was choosing my college major, the pressure from my dad intensified. He offered to pay for my entire education if I majored in accounting or finance, but said I'd have to figure out how to pay for school myself if I insisted on studying something impractical like art or design. I ended up taking out student loans and working part-time throughout college to pay for my graphic design degree. It was stressful and exhausting, but I was determined to study something I actually cared about, rather than letting my dad bribe me into a career I didn't want. Throughout my college years, my dad would make snide comments about my major whenever the topic came up. He'd ask how my colouring classes were going or make jokes about me becoming a starving artist. He seemed to think that belittling my field of study would somehow convince me to change my mind. When I'd show him projects I was working on or talk about internships I was applying for, he'd barely pay attention. He'd nod politely, but then change the subject to something else. It was clear that he didn't take my career goals seriously and was just waiting for me to come to my senses and switch to something more practical. The criticism got worse as I got closer to graduation. My dad would ask what my backup plan was when the art thing didn't work out. He'd suggest that I could always go back to school for accounting once I realised that design wasn't a viable career option. He also started trying to set up job interviews for me at accounting firms without asking if I was interested. He'd tell me about openings at his company or other businesses he knew, and he'd get annoyed when I told him I wasn't going to apply for jobs I didn't want. After I graduated, I started applying for entry-level design positions and freelance projects. It was competitive and challenging, but I was excited to finally start working in my chosen field. I was willing to start small and work my way up, because I knew that's how most creative careers develop. But my dad was constantly criticising my job search approach. He'd say I was being too picky and that I should be grateful for any job that paid decent money. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't just apply for office jobs that were hiring immediately rather than waiting for design opportunities. When I got my first freelance design client, I was thrilled and proud of the work I'd done. I showed my dad the project and explained how I'd solved the client's branding problems through visual design. Instead of congratulating me, he asked how much money I'd made and seemed disappointed that it wasn't more. He started making comments about how I'd wasted 4 years of college to make less money than I could have earned working retail. He'd point out that his entry-level accountants were making more than I was as a freelance designer, and he'd suggest that it wasn't too late for me to change career paths. The worst part was when he offered to get me an interview at his accounting firm for an entry-level position. He said I could start working there immediately and that he'd help me learn the business. He acted like this was a generous offer that I should be grateful for. When I turned down his job offer, he got angry and accused me of being stubborn and prideful. He said I was letting my ego get in the way of practical decision-making and that I'd rather struggle financially than admit he'd been right about creative careers being unstable. He started telling other family members about how I was struggling to find work in my chosen field, and several relatives began suggesting that maybe I should consider more practical career options. I felt like everyone was ganging up on me and questioning my life choices. The situation reached a breaking point when my dad told me that he was embarrassed to tell his colleagues what I did for work. He said that when people asked about his kids, he didn't know what to say about my career because graphic design wasn't a real profession that people would respect. I told him that his approval wasn't more important than my happiness and that I wasn't going to spend my life doing work I hated just to meet his expectations. I explained that I'd rather make less money doing something I loved than make more money being miserable every day. My dad said I was being naive and idealistic, and that I'd change my tune once I had real adult responsibilities, like a mortgage and family to support. He seemed convinced that eventually I'd come crawling back, asking for help getting into accounting. It's been 6 months since I graduated, and I'm starting to build a client base and establish myself as a freelance designer. It's challenging, and the income isn't steady yet, but I'm learning and growing in my field. I'm also working part-time at a design agency to gain more experience. My dad still makes comments about my career choice, but I've stopped trying to get his approval or understanding. I've realised that he's never going to respect my decision to pursue creative work, and I can't let his disappointment control my life choices. The hardest part is feeling like I don't have my father's support during what should be an exciting time in my career. I wish he could be proud of me for following my dreams and working hard to build something I care about, but instead he just sees my choices as a rejection of his values and advice. That story perfectly captures how some parents can't separate their own fears and limitations from their children's dreams. OP's dad was so stuck in his work is just work mentality that he couldn't understand someone actually wanting to enjoy their career. The constant belittling of calling it colouring classes and being embarrassed to tell colleagues what OP does for work is just cruel. Parents like this think they're being practical, but they're really just crushing their children's spirits because they can't imagine a life different from their own. Here's another story about parents who think their adult children's money belongs to them. My mum screamed at me for buying clothes with my own money. I'm 20 and I work full-time at a retail store while taking evening classes at community college. I don't make a lot of money, but I budget carefully and try to save what I can while still having a small amount to spend on things I want or need. Last month I realised that most of my clothes were getting pretty worn out and didn't fit well anymore. I'd been wearing the same jeans and t-shirts for over 2 years, and some of them had holes or stains that made me feel self-conscious at work and school. I decided to spend about $150 of my own money on some new clothes. I went to affordable stores and looked for sales, so I was able to get several new outfits that made me feel more confident and professional. I bought 2 pairs of jeans, a few nice shirts, and a sweater that I could wear to work. When I came home with my shopping bags, my mum immediately wanted to know what I'd bought and how much I'd spent. I showed her the clothes and explained that I'd needed some new things since my old clothes were falling apart. I thought she'd be happy that I was taking care of my appearance and being responsible about replacing worn-out items. Instead, she completely exploded. She started screaming about how irresponsible I was with money and how I was wasting my earnings on unnecessary things. She said that $150 was a huge amount of money to spend on clothes when there were more important things I should be saving for. I tried to explain that I'd been wearing the same old clothes for years and that having decent clothes was important for work and school. I pointed out that I'd been careful to shop sales and buy affordable items, not expensive designer clothes. But my mum wasn't listening to my explanations. She kept yelling about how selfish I was being and how I didn't understand the value of money. She said that when she was my age, she made her clothes last for years and never would have dreamed of spending so much money on new outfits. Then she started attacking the specific items I'd bought. She said the jeans were too expensive and that I could have gotten cheaper ones at a thrift store. She criticised the sweater as being impractical and said I didn't need nice clothes for my retail job. She made me feel like everything I'd chosen was stupid and wasteful. The worst part was when she demanded that I return everything and get my money back. She said I needed to learn to be more responsible with my finances and that buying new clothes when my old ones were still wearable was pure vanity and materialism. I told her that I wasn't returning the clothes because I'd needed them and had used my own money that I'd earned at my job. I explained that I was an adult who could make my own decisions about how to spend my paycheck. This made her even angrier. She said that since I was living in her house, she had a say in how I spent my money. She argued that if I was going to make irresponsible financial decisions, maybe I wasn't mature enough to be managing my own money at all. She started bringing up all the ways she supports me, like letting me live at home while going to school and occasionally buying groceries that I eat. She said that since she was helping me financially, I should be saving every penny instead of spending money on things like new clothes. I pointed out that I do pay her rent every month and that I buy most of my own food and personal items. I explained that I'd been responsible with my money and had saved up specifically so I could afford to buy clothes when I needed them. But she said that the rent I pay doesn't cover the full cost of supporting me and that I should be grateful for all the ways she helps me instead of wasting money on material things. She made it sound like buying necessary clothing was some kind of luxury spending that I couldn't afford. She also started criticizing my priorities and saying that I cared more about looking good than about being financially responsible. She said that people my age were too obsessed with appearance and that I should be focusing on building savings instead of buying trendy clothes. I tried to explain that the clothes I'd bought weren't trendy or expensive, just basic items that I needed to replace worn-out things. I showed her some of my old clothes that had holes and stains, but she said I could have continued wearing them or bought cheaper replacements at garage sales or thrift stores. My mum kept escalating the argument and started saying that if I was going to make such poor financial decisions, maybe I needed to move out and learn to budget on my own. She said that living under her roof meant following her rules about money management, even when it came to my own earnings. She threatened to start charging me more rent if I was going to spend money so carelessly. She said that if I could afford to blow $150 on clothes, then clearly I could afford to pay her more money each month for housing and utilities. I was getting really frustrated because I felt like I was being punished for taking care of a basic need. I'd worked hard to earn the money and had been thoughtful about what I purchased. I wasn't buying luxury items or going on shopping sprees. I was just replacing clothes that were literally falling apart. The argument continued for over an hour, with my mum getting more and more worked up about my supposed financial irresponsibility. She kept coming back to the $150 amount, like it was some outrageous sum of money that proved I had no understanding of budgeting. She also started bringing up other times when I'd spent money on things she considered unnecessary, like when I'd bought coffee at school or gone to see a movie with friends. She acted like any spending that wasn't absolutely essential was proof that I was wasteful and immature. What really hurt was when she said she was disappointed in how materialistic I'd become and that she'd thought she'd raised me to have better values. She made it sound like buying clothes that fit properly was some kind of moral failing rather than a practical necessity. I ended up leaving the house to cool off because the argument was going nowhere. When I came back later, my mum was still angry and made passive-aggressive comments about people who don't appreciate what they have and waste money on vanity purchases. She also started telling other family members about how I'd spent $150 though on clothes in one shopping trip, making it sound like I'd gone on some kind of ridiculous spending spree. When my aunt asked me about it, I had to explain that I'd just bought a few basic items to replace worn-out clothes. The whole situation made me feel terrible about something that should have been a normal, responsible purchase. I started second-guessing myself and wondering if maybe I really had been wasteful, even though logically I knew that replacing old, damaged clothes was a reasonable expense. My mum continued making comments about my shopping trip for weeks afterward. Whenever money came up in conversation, she'd mention how some people in the family don't understand the value of a dollar and spend money carelessly on things they don't really need. She also started scrutinizing other purchases I made, questioning whether I really needed things like shampoo or school supplies. It felt like she was looking for evidence that I was fiscally irresponsible, so she could prove her point about the clothes shopping incident. The worst part was that I started feeling guilty about wearing the new clothes I'd bought. Every time I put on one of the new shirts or the sweater, I'd think about my mum's reaction and wonder if I really had wasted money on unnecessary items. I've started hiding any new purchases I make and being more secretive about how I spend my money. It's exhausting to have to justify every expense to someone else, especially when it's money I've earned through my own work. The whole experience has made me more eager to move out and have complete financial independence. I realise that as long as I'm living at home, my mum is going to feel like she has the right to control and criticise how I spend my own earnings. Some of my friends think my mum was being ridiculous and controlling, while others say that parents naturally worry about their children's financial decisions, and maybe she was just trying to help me learn to budget better. I keep going back and forth about whether her reaction was justified or completely over the top. That story ends there, and the level of control and manipulation over $150 worth of basic clothing is just insane. OP worked for that money, needed new clothes because their old ones had literal holes, and still got screamed at for taking care of a basic human need. The fact that she involved other family members to shame OP and then started monitoring every purchase afterward shows this was never about teaching budgeting. It was about control. Making your adult child feel guilty for buying necessary clothing is a special kind of toxic parenting. Let's move to another story about parents who can't accept their children growing up and becoming independent. My parents forbade me from moving out at 20. I'm 20 years old, and I've been working full-time for about a year and a half at a local insurance office. I make decent money for my age, and I've been saving up to get my own apartment. I found a really nice one-bedroom place that I can afford, and I was excited about finally having my own space and independence. When I told my parents about my plans to move out, I expected them to be proud that I was taking this step toward adulthood. Instead, they completely freaked out and told me that moving out at my age was irresponsible and unnecessary. My mum started crying and saying that she couldn't believe I wanted to abandon the family. She acted like my desire to have my own place was a personal rejection of her and my dad, rather than a normal part of growing up and becoming independent. My dad took a different approach and tried to convince me that moving out was a terrible financial decision. He started calculating all the expenses I'd have living on my own: rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, and adding them up to show me how much money I'd be spending each month. He said that if I stayed at home, I could save all that money and build up a substantial nest egg for my future. He made it sound like paying rent was just throwing money away when I could continue living at home for free. I tried to explain that independence and privacy were worth the financial cost to me. I said that I appreciated everything they'd done for me, but that I was ready to start living on my own and learning to manage a household. But my parents said I was being selfish and impulsive. They claimed that there was no good reason for me to move out when I had a comfortable situation at home. They said that most parents would be hurt if their child wanted to leave home so young. My mum started listing all the things she does for me that I'd have to do for myself in an apartment. She talked about cooking, cleaning, laundry, and grocery shopping like they were impossible tasks that I couldn't possibly manage on my own. She also brought up safety concerns, saying that it wasn't safe for a young woman to live alone. She painted scary pictures of all the things that could happen to me in my own apartment, from break-ins to medical emergencies where no one would be around to help. My dad focused more on the practical arguments against moving out. He said that I didn't understand how expensive it really was to maintain a household and that I'd end up struggling financially and having to ask them for help. He also suggested that I should wait until I got married to move out of their house. He said that was the traditional way things were done and that there was no reason to live alone when I could continue benefiting from their support. When I pointed out that I'm an adult who's capable of making my own decisions, they said that just because I was legally an adult didn't mean I was mature enough to live independently. They said that real maturity meant recognizing when you have a good situation and not throwing it away for no reason. My mum started getting emotional and asking why I didn't want to spend time with them anymore. She said that if I moved out, our relationship would never be the same, and that I'd regret choosing independence over family closeness. She also brought up all the money they'd spent raising me and said that the least I could do was stay home and be part of the family instead of running off to live by myself. She made it sound like wanting my own place was incredibly ungrateful after everything they'd provided for me. The arguments got more intense when I told them I'd already put down a deposit on the apartment and signed a lease. They were furious that I'd made such a big decision without getting their approval first. My dad said that since I was still on their health insurance and car insurance, they had a say in major life decisions like where I lived. He threatened to remove me from their insurance policies if I insisted on moving out against their wishes. My mum said she was so disappointed in me that she didn't know if she could support my decision to move out. She said that if I was determined to leave the family, then maybe I should be completely independent and not expect any help or support from them. They both started acting like my desire to move out was a betrayal of their love and sacrifice. They said that after everything they'd done for me, they deserved to have me stay home and be part of the family rather than abandoning them for my own selfish desires. The emotional manipulation was intense. They'd alternate between making me feel guilty for wanting to leave and trying to scare me about how difficult life would be on my own. They painted my independence as either selfish ingratitude or naive stupidity. I tried to compromise by suggesting that I could move out but still come over for family dinners regularly and spend time with them on weekends. But they said that wouldn't be the same, and that once I moved out, I'd gradually drift away from the family. They also started involving extended family members in their campaign to convince me to stay home. My grandmother called to express her concern about me living alone so young, and several aunts and uncles reached out to ask if I was sure I was making the right decision. My parents had clearly told everyone that I was making a rash and irresponsible choice to move out, and they'd recruited the whole family to help pressure me into staying home. It felt like everyone was ganging up on me for wanting basic adult independence. The situation got even worse when my parents started threatening to cut off all financial support if I went through with moving out. They said that if I wanted to be independent, I'd have to be completely independent, including paying for my own phone bill, car insurance, and health insurance. They acted like their financial support came with strings attached and that accepting their help meant I had to live according to their rules and preferences. They seemed to think that threatening to withdraw support would force me to change my mind about moving out. When I told them I was prepared to take on those additional expenses because independence was worth it to me, they seemed shocked. They'd apparently expected their threats to make me reconsider, and they didn't know how to handle my willingness to accept complete financial independence. I ended up moving into my apartment despite their objections and threats. The first few weeks were tense because my parents were barely speaking to me and were making passive-aggressive comments about how I'd chosen my apartment over my family. But gradually, things started to improve. My parents realised that I was handling living on my own just fine, and that my moving out hadn't destroyed our relationship. We actually get along better now that I have my own space and they can't micromanage my daily life. Looking back, I think my parents were scared of losing control over me rather than genuinely concerned about my well-being. They'd gotten used to having input on all my decisions, and my moving out represented a shift toward true adult independence that they weren't ready for. That story shows how some parents struggle so much with their children becoming adults that they'll use guilt, manipulation, and financial threats to maintain control. OP was 20 years old with a full-time job, and their parents acted like moving out was abandoning the family. The emotional manipulation of crying about being abandoned and recruiting extended family to pressure OP into staying is just toxic. Parents need to understand that raising independent adults means eventually letting them be independent. That's literally the goal of parenting. Here's another story about a parent who couldn't understand basic boundaries even at their child's wedding. My mum wanted to invite her friends on my honeymoon. I got married 6 months ago to my wonderful husband, Jake. We had been planning our wedding for over a year and were so excited about finally becoming husband and wife. We saved up for months to afford a nice honeymoon trip to Hawaii because it had always been a dream destination for both of us. About 2 months before the wedding, my mum started asking a lot of questions about our honeymoon plans. At first, I thought she was just being interested and supportive, so I shared details about the resort we'd booked and the activities we were planning to do. But then she started making comments about how beautiful Hawaii sounded and how she'd always wanted to visit there herself. She began talking about how expensive it must be and how nice it would be to have a tropical vacation after all the stress of wedding planning. I started getting a weird feeling about where these conversations were headed, but I tried to brush off my concerns. I figured my mum was just excited about the wedding and maybe feeling a little jealous that we were going somewhere she'd never been. But then she dropped the bombshell. She asked if she and my dad could come along on our honeymoon. She said it would be fun to make it a family trip and that they could help us celebrate our new marriage in such a beautiful location. I was completely shocked. I explained that a honeymoon is specifically meant to be a romantic trip for newlyweds and that having parents along would completely defeat the purpose. I tried to say this as gently as possible because I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but my mum didn't seem to understand why their presence would be a problem. She said it would be like a second wedding celebration and that she wanted to be there to make sure we were safe and having a good time. I tried to explain that the whole point of a honeymoon is for the couple to have alone time together and start their married life privately. I said we appreciated her wanting to celebrate with us, but that we needed this time to ourselves. My mum got defensive and said I was being selfish by not wanting to include family in our celebration. She pointed out that she and my dad had paid for a significant portion of the wedding and that they deserved to be part of the honeymoon experience too. She started talking about how hurt she was that I didn't want to spend time with her and how she'd been looking forward to a family vacation for years. She made it sound like I was deliberately excluding her from something she was entitled to be part of. When I stood firm and said absolutely not, she escalated the situation. She suggested that maybe she and my dad could book rooms at the same resort and we could just spend some time together during the trip. She acted like this was a reasonable compromise. I explained that even being at the same resort would ruin the romantic atmosphere we were hoping for on our honeymoon. I said we'd be happy to plan a family vacation with them at a different time, but that our honeymoon needed to be just for Jake and me. My mum got angry and accused me of being influenced by Jake to exclude my family. She said that before I got engaged, I would have been excited about the idea of a family trip to Hawaii. She claimed that Jake was turning me against my own parents. She also started questioning whether we really needed to spend so much money on a honeymoon when we could use that money for more practical things, like furniture for our new apartment. She said that going on an expensive trip right after the wedding was financially irresponsible. When I pointed out that we'd saved up specifically for this honeymoon and that it was our money to spend how we wanted, she said that couples who were really committed to building a life together wouldn't waste money on luxury vacations. My dad got involved and tried a different approach. He said that they'd been feeling left out of our wedding planning and that coming on the honeymoon would be a way for them to feel more included in our new marriage. He suggested that Hawaii was big enough for all of us and that we could do some activities together while still having time as a couple. He made it sound like we were being unreasonable by not wanting to share such a beautiful destination with family. The pressure continued for weeks, with my mum bringing up the honeymoon constantly and trying different angles to convince us to let them come along. She'd talk about how lonely she'd be while we were gone and how much she'd worry about us being so far away. She also started involving other family members, telling them about our Hawaii plans and mentioning how she wished she could be there to make sure we were safe. Several relatives called to suggest that maybe a family honeymoon would be nice and that we should consider including my parents. My mum even went as far as looking up flights and hotel prices for the same dates we were travelling. She showed me printouts of available rooms at nearby resorts and talked about how affordable it would be for them to come along. When I told Jake about all the pressure I was getting, he was horrified. He said that having my parents on our honeymoon would be the worst possible way to start our marriage and that we needed to put our foot down immediately. We ended up having a serious conversation with my parents where we explained that under no circumstances would they be joining us on our honeymoon. We said that this was non-negotiable and that they needed to respect our decision as a married couple. My mum cried and said we were being cruel and that she just wanted to be part of our happiness. She claimed that other families would be thrilled to share such a special trip together and that we were being unnecessarily exclusive. My dad said he was disappointed that we didn't value family time enough to include them in our celebration. He made it sound like we were choosing to be selfish rather than generous with our good fortune. The whole situation created tension that lasted through our wedding and honeymoon. My mum made passive-aggressive comments about how she hoped we were having fun without our family and how lonely it was at home while we were living it up in paradise. When we got back from our honeymoon, she immediately wanted to see all our photos and hear about everything we'd done. She kept making comments about how she would have loved certain activities and how much she would have enjoyed the resort. She also started planning a family vacation to Hawaii for the following year, saying that since we'd had such a wonderful time there, maybe we could all go together. She seemed to think that our honeymoon had been like a scouting trip for a future family vacation. The experience taught me that my mum has trouble understanding appropriate boundaries, especially when it comes to major life events. She seemed to think that because she was my mother, she was automatically entitled to be included in everything I did. That story ends there. The complete inability to understand that a honeymoon is meant for the couple alone is just mind-boggling. Wanting to tag along on your daughter's romantic getaway and then guilt-tripping her for saying no crosses every boundary that exists. The fact that she involved other family members and tried to book rooms at the same resort shows she was never going to take no for an answer. Let's move to another story about a parent who thought their child's job was negotiable. My dad expected me to quit my job to watch his kids. I'm 23 and I work full-time as a receptionist at a dental office. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays my bills and I like my co-workers. I've been there for almost 2 years and I'm pretty good at what I do. My dad remarried last year to a woman named Carol, who has twin 6-year-olds from her previous marriage. They're nice kids, but they're a lot of energy and require constant supervision. Carol works part-time as a nurse, but her schedule is pretty unpredictable with different shifts. The problem started when their regular babysitter moved away about 3 months ago. Since then, they've been struggling to find reliable childcare for the twins when Carol has to work, and my dad is busy with his contracting business. At first, they asked if I could help out occasionally when they were really stuck. I was happy to babysit on my days off, or in the evenings when I didn't have other plans. The kids and I get along well, and I didn't mind helping out the family when needed. But then the requests started becoming more frequent and more demanding. Instead of asking if I was available, they started assuming I would babysit whenever they needed coverage. They'd tell me about Carol's work schedule and expect me to rearrange my life accordingly. The breaking point came last month when my dad called me at work and told me I needed to leave early to pick up the twins from school because their regular after-school care had fallen through. He said it was an emergency and that I was the only one available to help. I explained that I couldn't just leave work in the middle of the day without notice, and that my boss would be really upset if I abandoned my responsibilities to go babysit. I suggested they call Carol's mother or one of their other family members who might be available. My dad got angry and said that family should come first and that a job was just a job, but family was forever. He said I was being selfish by prioritizing work over helping my siblings when they needed me. I tried to explain that leaving work without permission could get me fired and that I needed my job to pay my rent and bills. But he said that if I lost my job, I could always move back home and help out more with the kids full time. That's when I realized what he was really suggesting. He wasn't just asking for occasional babysitting help. He wanted me to quit my job and become a full-time nanny for Carol's kids. He seemed to think this was a reasonable solution to their childcare problems. When I told him absolutely not, he said I was being ungrateful and selfish. He pointed out that Carol's kids were technically my step-siblings now, and that I had a responsibility to help raise them as part of the family. He also started talking about how much money they were spending on childcare and how having me watch the kids would save the family a significant amount each month. He acted like me giving up my income to provide free babysitting was just good financial planning. I explained that I needed my job not just for money, but for my own independence and career development. I said that while I was happy to help out occasionally, I wasn't going to sacrifice my professional life to solve their childcare issues. My dad said I was being dramatic and that plenty of young people take time off from their careers to help family. He suggested that this could just be a temporary arrangement until they found more stable childcare, but I knew that temporary would probably turn into permanent. Carol got involved and started talking about how hard it was to be a working mother with young children. She said that having family support would make such a huge difference in their lives and that she'd always dreamed of having that kind of help. She also mentioned that they'd be happy to pay me something for watching the kids, but when I asked how much, it was significantly less than what I was making at my current job. They wanted full-time childcare at part-time wages. The emotional manipulation escalated when they started involving the twins. They told the kids that I might be able to spend more time with them and help them with homework and activities. The kids got excited and started asking when I was going to quit my job to hang out with them more. My dad also started criticizing my job and saying that working as a receptionist wasn't really a career anyway. He said that helping raise children was more important and meaningful than answering phones and scheduling appointments. When I continued to refuse, he got really angry and accused me of not caring about family. He said that when he was young, he would have done anything to help his parents and siblings, and he was disappointed that I didn't have the same family values. He also threatened to stop inviting me to family gatherings if I wasn't willing to be a real part of the family by helping with the kids. He made it sound like my refusal to quit my job was equivalent to rejecting the entire family. The situation came to a head when they had a last-minute childcare emergency and expected me to call in sick to work to watch the twins. When I refused and went to work as scheduled, my dad called me repeatedly throughout the day, trying to guilt me into leaving. That evening he came to my apartment and told me that my priorities were all wrong and that I was being incredibly selfish. He said that Carol had been crying because she had to miss work, and that it was my fault for putting my job before family needs. I told him that their childcare problems were not my responsibility to solve, and that expecting me to quit my job was completely unreasonable. I said I'd continue to help out when I could, but that I wasn't going to sacrifice my career for their convenience. My dad said he was ashamed of me and that he didn't know where he'd gone wrong in raising me. He said that family was supposed to stick together and help each other, and that I was proving I didn't understand what family really meant. The relationship has been strained ever since. They still ask me to babysit occasionally, but there's always tension because they think I should be doing more. They make comments about how hard their life is and how much easier it would be if I were more supportive. I've started to realise that they never really saw me as an independent adult with my own life and responsibilities. They viewed me more as a family resource that should be available whenever they needed help, regardless of what it cost me personally. That story ends there. The entitlement of expecting your adult child to quit their job and become a full-time ends staggering. Annie for step-siblings is absolutely OP's dad literally tried to manipulate them into giving up their career and independence to solve his childcare problems for below-market wages. The guilt trips about family coming first while asking OP to sacrifice their entire livelihood shows he never saw them as a person with their own needs and goals. Moving on to another story about parents who think their children's personal space belongs to the family. My mum told me I had to give my room to my cousin. I'm 19 and I still live at home while going to community college. I have a decent-sized bedroom that I've spent years decorating and organising exactly how I like it. It's really the only space in the house that feels completely mine, and I take pride in keeping it clean and comfortable. Last month, my mum told me that my cousin Emma was coming to stay with us for a few weeks while she looked for an apartment in our city. Emma is 22 and just graduated college, so she's moving here for a new job. I was happy that she was doing well and didn't mind having her visit, but then my mum explained the sleeping arrangements she'd planned and I was shocked. She said that Emma would be staying in my room and that I'd be sleeping on the living room couch for however long Emma needed to be here. I asked why Emma couldn't sleep on the couch instead, since she was the guest and it was supposed to be a temporary arrangement. My mum said that wouldn't be appropriate because Emma was older and had just graduated college, so she deserved to have privacy and comfort during her job search. I pointed out that it was my room with all my belongings, and that displacing me from my own space didn't make sense when there were other options. I suggested that we could set up an air mattress in the family room, or that Emma could stay in my parents' room if they wanted to give her more privacy. My mum got annoyed and said I was being selfish and inhospitable. She said that when family needs help, we should be willing to make sacrifices to accommodate them. She acted like giving up my room was just basic courtesy that any decent person would offer. She also said that since Emma was job hunting and going on interviews, she needed a quiet, private space to prepare and make phone calls. My mum claimed that having the bedroom would help Emma make a good impression and find employment faster. When I suggested that Emma could use the bedroom during the day for job search activities, but sleep somewhere else at night, my mum said that was too complicated and that I was trying to make things difficult for everyone. I tried to explain that my room wasn't just a place to sleep. It had all my clothes, school supplies, computer, and personal belongings. Moving everything out would be a huge hassle, and I wouldn't have anywhere to put my stuff or do my homework. My mum said I could keep my clothes in the hall closet and do my schoolwork at the kitchen table. She acted like these were simple solutions and that I was being unreasonable for wanting to maintain access to my own space. She also started talking about how Emma had always looked up to me as her older cousin and how disappointed she'd be if I wasn't welcoming and generous during her visit. My mum made it sound like refusing to give up my room would hurt Emma's feelings and damage our relationship. When Emma arrived, she seemed surprised that the plan was for her to take my room. She said she'd expected to sleep on the couch or in a guest room, and she offered to set up somewhere else so I wouldn't have to move out of my space. But my mum insisted that Emma take the bedroom and said it was already decided. She told Emma that I was happy to give up my room to help family, even though I'd never agreed to any of this arrangement. Emma looked uncomfortable, but didn't want to argue with my mum, so she moved her stuff into my room while I gathered my things and tried to figure out how to organise them in the living room and other parts of the house. Sleeping on the couch was terrible. The living room stayed bright because of streetlights, and I could hear every sound from the kitchen and other parts of the house. I wasn't getting good sleep, which started affecting my performance in my college classes. I also had no privacy anymore. I couldn't change clothes in the living room, and I had nowhere quiet to study or talk on the phone. All my personal belongings were scattered around the house in whatever storage spaces my mum could find. After a week of this arrangement, I asked my mum when Emma might be moving out so I could get my room back. My mum said she didn't know because Emma was still looking for an apartment and hadn't found anything affordable yet. I suggested that maybe we could set up a different arrangement since it was taking longer than expected, but my mum said it would be rude to ask Emma to move to the couch after she'd already settled into the bedroom. Emma had been there for 2 weeks when I finally talked to her directly about the situation. I explained that sleeping on the couch was really affecting my sleep and school performance, and I asked if we could work out some kind of sharing arrangement. Emma was really understanding and said she felt bad that I'd been displaced from my own room. She offered to alternate nights or to move her stuff to the living room, but when my mum found out we were discussing changes, she got angry. My mum said that constantly switching rooms would be disruptive and confusing, and that I needed to stop complaining about a temporary inconvenience. She said that Emma was going through a stressful time with job hunting and apartment searching, and that my comfort wasn't as important as Emma's needs. She also accused me of being a bad hostess and making Emma feel unwelcome by complaining about the sleeping arrangements. She said that Emma was probably feeling guilty because of my attitude, which wasn't fair to someone who was already dealing with the stress of starting a new job. The situation dragged on for over a month, with me sleeping on the couch every night and having no privacy or personal space. Emma did find a job, but she was still looking for an affordable apartment, and my mum kept saying it would be cruel to rush her out before she found a good place. I started spending more time at the library and at friends' houses just to have somewhere quiet to study and do homework. Coming home meant sleeping poorly on the couch and having no space that felt like mine. Finally, Emma found an apartment and moved out, but the whole experience left me feeling resentful toward my mum. She displaced me from my own room for over a month without considering how it would affect my sleep, schoolwork, or mental health. My mum acted like I should be proud that we'd helped family during a difficult time, but I felt like my needs had been completely ignored in favour of making Emma comfortable. I'd basically been treated like I didn't matter as much as the visiting family member. When I tried to talk to my mum about how difficult the situation had been for me, she said I was being dramatic and that learning to sacrifice for family was an important life lesson. She made it sound like my discomfort had been character building rather than unnecessarily disruptive. The whole thing made me realise that my mum doesn't really respect my need for personal space and privacy. She seems to think that because I'm her child and live in her house, she can relocate me whenever it's convenient for other people. That story ends there. Making your own child sleep on a couch for over a month so a visiting relative can have their bedroom is just cruel. OP's mum completely dismissed their need for sleep, privacy, and study space in favour of making the guest comfortable. The fact that she wouldn't even consider alternative arrangements and then accused OP of being a bad host for wanting their own room back shows a complete lack of respect for their child's basic needs. Here's another story about parents who tried to steal their child's achievements. My parents took away my scholarship money. I'm 18 and I just graduated from high school with really good grades. I worked incredibly hard throughout my junior and senior years to maintain a high GPA because I knew I'd need scholarships to afford college. My family doesn't have a lot of money, so getting financial aid was crucial for my education plans. All my hard work paid off when I received a partial academic scholarship worth $8,000 per year for 4 years. It wasn't a full ride, but it was a significant amount that would make college much more affordable. I was so proud of earning this scholarship through my academic achievements. When the scholarship letter arrived, my parents seemed excited and proud of me at first. They talked about how smart I was and how all my studying had finally paid off. They even called some relatives to brag about my academic success. But then things took a weird turn. My dad started asking detailed questions about how the scholarship money would be distributed and whether it went directly to the college or if we received it as a check. He seemed very interested in the financial logistics of the award. A few days later, my parents sat me down for what they called a family financial planning meeting. They explained that our family was going through some money troubles and that my dad's work had been slow lately. They said they needed to make some difficult decisions about how to manage our household expenses. That's when they told me their plan. They said that since the scholarship money was coming to our family, it should be used to help with immediate family needs, rather than just my college expenses. They wanted to use part of the scholarship money to catch up on bills and maybe make some home repairs. I was shocked and tried to explain that scholarship money was specifically designated for educational expenses and couldn't just be used for whatever the family needed. I told them that using it for non-educational purposes might violate the terms of the scholarship. My mum said that wasn't how family finances work, and that when money comes into the household, it should benefit everyone, not just one person. She said that my education would benefit from having a more stable home environment, so using some of the money for family expenses was actually an investment in my success. My dad took a more direct approach and said that since I was still a minor and living under their roof, they had the right to manage any money that came my way. He said that when I turned 18 and moved out, I could make my own financial decisions, but until then, they were in charge. I tried to argue that the scholarship was awarded to me personally for my academic achievements, and that taking it away would be stealing my opportunity for higher education. I reminded them that I'd worked incredibly hard for years to earn this financial aid, but my parents said I was being selfish and ungrateful. They pointed out all the money they'd spent on me over the years for food, housing, clothes, and school supplies. They said that the least I could do was help the family when we were struggling financially. My mum started crying and talking about how stressed she was about money and how much this scholarship could help our whole family get back on track. She made me feel guilty for wanting to use my money for college when they were struggling to pay basic bills. They also said that I could always take out student loans to pay for college, but that their immediate financial needs couldn't wait. They acted like borrowing money for education was no big deal, but that their current expenses were urgent emergencies. When I continued to object, my dad got angry and said that maybe I didn't appreciate everything they'd done for me. He said that other kids would be grateful to help their family instead of hoarding money for their own selfish purposes. The emotional manipulation got intense. My parents started talking about how disappointed they were in my attitude and how they'd thought they'd raised me to care about family. They made it sound like wanting to use my scholarship for college made me a terrible daughter. They also started involving my younger siblings in the conversation, explaining that the scholarship money could help pay for things the whole family needed. My little brother started asking why I didn't want to help buy him new school clothes, which made me feel even worse. My parents ultimately decided to redirect a significant portion of my scholarship money toward family expenses without my consent. They said that when the money arrived, they'd take what the family needed, and I could have whatever was left for college costs. I tried to contact the scholarship organisation to explain what was happening, but they said that since I was still a minor, my parents had the legal right to manage the funds. They suggested I work it out with my family or wait until I was 18 to have more control over the money. By the time the scholarship funds were distributed, my parents had already planned how they wanted to spend most of it. They used some to pay off credit card debt, some for car repairs, and some for home improvement projects they said would benefit the whole family. I ended up with only about $2,000 of my $8,000 scholarship for actual college expenses. The rest had been absorbed into the family budget for things that had nothing to do with my education. I felt like my academic achievements had been stolen from me. The worst part was that my parents acted like they'd done me a favour by teaching me about family responsibility and financial management. They said that learning to share resources with family was more important than hoarding money for my own education. I had to take out much larger student loans than I'd originally planned because most of my scholarship money had been taken for family use. What should have been a celebration of my academic success turned into a lesson about how my achievements could be redistributed for other people's benefit. The whole experience made me lose a lot of trust in my parents and made me eager to become financially independent as soon as possible. I realized that they saw my scholarship not as recognition of my hard work, but as unexpected family income that they could claim for their own purposes. That story ends there. Stealing your child's scholarship money that they earned through years of hard work is just despicable. OP spent their high school career working toward this goal, and their parents decided it was family money instead of an educational award. Using scholarship funds for car repairs and home improvements, while forcing your child to take on debt for college shows, they never respected OP's achievements or future. The manipulation about family responsibility when they're literally stealing educational opportunities is just sick. Here's our next story about parents who think they can control their adult children's romantic lives. My dad said I couldn't date until I was 25. I'm 21, and I've been dating my girlfriend Sarah for about 8 months now. We met at college and have a really healthy, supportive relationship. Sarah is kind, smart, and we share a lot of the same values and interests. I thought my family would be happy that I'd found someone who makes me so happy. But when I brought Sarah home to meet my parents for the first time, my dad pulled me aside afterward and told me he didn't approve of me having a serious relationship at my age. He said I was too young to be tied down, and that dating would distract me from my studies and career goals. I tried to explain that Sarah actually motivates me to do better in school, and that our relationship doesn't interfere with my academic performance at all. I pointed out that I'd maintained good grades throughout our entire relationship, and that having her support had actually helped me stay focused. My dad said that didn't matter because relationships at my age never last anyway, and that I was wasting time and emotional energy on something that would inevitably end. He said I should be concentrating on building my future instead of playing house with some girl I'd probably forget about in a few years. When I told him that Sarah and I were serious about each other and that I could see a future with her, he got really angry. He said I was being naive and that I had no idea what real commitment meant. He claimed that people my age think they're in love, but don't understand the realities of adult relationships. Then he dropped his ultimatum. He said that if I wanted to continue living at home and receiving his financial support for college, I needed to break up with Sarah and focus entirely on my education. He gave me a choice between my relationship and my family's support. I was shocked that he would try to control my personal life like that. I explained that I'm an adult who's capable of managing both a relationship and my responsibilities, and that forcing me to choose between love and financial support was manipulative and unfair. My dad said that as long as he was paying for my education and housing, he had every right to set conditions about how I spent my time and energy. He said that dating seriously was a luxury I couldn't afford until I was financially independent and established in my career. He suggested that I should wait until I was at least 25 and had graduated college, found a stable job, and saved up some money before even thinking about serious relationships. He said that rushing into romance too early would derail all my long-term goals. My mum initially seemed more understanding, but she gradually started supporting my dad's position. She said that she worried Sarah was becoming too important to me, and that young people often make poor decisions when they're infatuated with someone. She brought up examples of friends and relatives who'd gotten too serious too young and ended up making mistakes like dropping out of school or getting married before they were ready. She said she didn't want me to limit my options by committing to one person so early in life. The pressure intensified when my dad started setting rules about how much time I could spend with Sarah. He said I could see her once a week maximum, and that she wasn't allowed to come to family events or spend the night at our house. He treated her like she was some kind of bad influence. He also started monitoring my phone and asking detailed questions about where I was going and who I was with. If he suspected I was spending time with Sarah beyond his approved limits, he'd threaten to cut off my allowance or kick me out of the house. My dad began criticizing everything about Sarah, from her major to her family background to her career goals. He'd make comments about how she was probably just looking for someone to support her financially, and that she was distracting me from more important things. When Sarah and I tried to have normal college experiences like going to parties or campus events together, my dad would accuse me of prioritizing social activities over academics. He acted like any time spent with her was time stolen from my studies. The worst part was when he started involving my extended family in his campaign against my relationship. He told my grandparents and aunts that I was making poor choices and getting too serious with a girl who wasn't good for me. Suddenly I was getting calls from relatives expressing concern about my relationship priorities. My dad even went as far as contacting some of my professors to ask about my academic performance, claiming he was worried that my relationship was affecting my grades. When my professors told him I was doing fine, he said they probably just didn't see the full picture. The emotional manipulation was constant. He'd alternate between threatening to withdraw support and trying to make me feel guilty for choosing a girlfriend over my family's wishes. He'd say things like he was disappointed that I'd rather make my girlfriend happy than listen to my parents' wisdom. He also started making financial threats more specific. He said that if I didn't break up with Sarah, he'd stop paying my tuition, car insurance, and phone bill. He'd make me move out and figure out how to support myself while finishing college. When I called his bluff and said I was prepared to become financially independent rather than give up my relationship, he seemed shocked. He'd apparently expected his threats to force me into compliance, and he didn't know how to handle my willingness to choose love over money. I ended up getting a part-time job and applying for financial aid so I could reduce my dependence on my parents' support. It was stressful and exhausting to work while maintaining my grades, but I refused to let them control my personal life through financial manipulation. Sarah was incredibly understanding throughout this whole ordeal. She offered to break up with me to make things easier with my family, but I told her that giving in to their demands would just teach them that they could control me through threats and ultimatums. The relationship with my parents has been strained for months now. They still make passive-aggressive comments about how I'm making poor choices and how I'll regret prioritizing a college girlfriend over my family's guidance. My dad continues to predict that Sarah and I will break up soon, and he says he'll be there to say, "I told you so," when it happens. He seems to be waiting for our relationship to fail, so he can prove that he was right about young people not being capable of lasting love. But Sarah and I are stronger than ever, and we're talking about moving in together after graduation. We've realised that going through this challenge together has actually strengthened our relationship and shown us that we can handle external pressure as a team. Some of my friends think I should have just gone along with my parents' demands to keep the peace, while others say my dad's behaviour is controlling and inappropriate. I keep wondering if there was a better way to handle the situation, but I also feel like standing up for my relationship was the right choice. The whole experience has made me realise that my dad doesn't really respect me as an adult capable of making my own decisions. He seems to think that financial support gives him the right to control every aspect of my life, including who I love. That story is just infuriating because OP's dad literally tried to blackmail them out of a healthy relationship. The nerve of thinking you can control your adult child's love life through financial threats is staggering. Sarah sounds like a wonderful person, and the fact that she was willing to sacrifice their relationship to make things easier for OP shows what kind of character she has. OP absolutely made the right choice, standing up to their controlling father. Here's another story about parents who can't understand that pets aren't just disposable objects. My mom made me get rid of my dog. I'm 19 and about 6 months ago, I adopted a rescue dog named Max from the local animal shelter. He's a 2-year-old golden retriever mix who had been surrendered by his previous family because they were moving and couldn't take him. When I met him at the shelter, he was so sweet and gentle that I fell in love immediately. I'd been wanting a dog for years, but my parents always said no when I was younger. Now that I'm working full-time and contributing to household expenses, I thought they'd be more open to the idea. I did my research about dog ownership, budgeted for all the expenses, and made sure I could handle the responsibility. Before adopting Max, I talked to my parents about it, and they seemed okay with the idea. My mum said that having a dog might be nice for the family, and my dad didn't object. They asked some questions about costs and care requirements, but nothing they said made me think they were against it. Max settled into our home beautifully. He's incredibly well behaved, house-trained, and gets along great with everyone. He doesn't bark excessively, doesn't chew furniture, and is basically the perfect dog. I take him for walks every morning and evening, clean up after him, and handle all his care completely on my own. The problems started about 2 months after I brought Max home. My mum began complaining that having a dog was more work than she'd expected, even though she wasn't doing any of the work herself. She'd make comments about dog hair on the furniture or having to be more careful about leaving food out. She also started saying that Max was too energetic and that big dogs didn't belong in houses. This was confusing because Max is actually pretty calm and spends most of his time sleeping or lying peacefully near wherever I am. He's not destructive or hyperactive at all. My mum's complaints escalated when she decided that Max was the reason she was having allergy symptoms. She'd never mentioned being allergic to dogs before, but suddenly she was blaming every sniffle and sneeze on Max's presence in the house. When I suggested she see a doctor to confirm whether she was actually allergic to dogs, she got defensive and said she knew her own body. She claimed that her symptoms had started right after Max arrived, and that it was obvious he was the cause. I offered to increase my cleaning routine, buy air purifiers, and keep Max out of certain rooms if that would help with her supposed allergies. But she said that wouldn't be enough, and that the only solution was getting rid of the dog entirely. I was heartbroken and tried to explain that Max wasn't just a pet to me, he was family. I told her about how he'd been surrendered once already, and how traumatic it would be for him to lose another home. I begged her to let me try other solutions before giving up on him. My mum said I was being dramatic, and that it was just a dog, not a family member. She said that my attachment to Max was unhealthy, and that I needed to learn to prioritize people over animals. She acted like my love for my dog was some kind of character flaw. She also started making financial arguments about the cost of dog ownership, even though I was paying for everything myself. She'd complain about the expense of dog food, vet bills and supplies, like I was somehow forcing her to pay for things she'd never contributed to. When I continued to resist giving up Max, my mum escalated her complaints. She started saying that having a dog was affecting her quality of life, and that she couldn't be comfortable in her own home anymore. She made it sound like Max's presence was making her miserable. She also began involving my dad, telling him about all the problems she was having with the dog. She exaggerated every minor inconvenience and made it seem like Max was causing chaos in our household, which wasn't true at all. My dad initially seemed neutral about the situation, but my mum's constant complaints eventually wore him down. He started suggesting that maybe having a dog wasn't working out, and that I should consider finding Max a different home. The emotional manipulation intensified when my mum started talking about her health and how the stress of living with a dog was affecting her well-being. She claimed that her allergy symptoms were getting worse and that she was worried about long-term health effects. She also said that if I really cared about her, I'd prioritize her comfort over my attachment to a pet. She made it sound like keeping Max meant I didn't love or respect my mother, which made me feel incredibly guilty. The breaking point came when I arrived home from work one day to find Max gone. My mum had taken him to the animal shelter while I was at work and surrendered him without telling me. She said she'd reached her limit and couldn't live with the dog anymore. I was devastated and rushed to the shelter immediately, but they said that once an animal is surrendered, there's a waiting period before it can be readopted to ensure it's not an impulsive decision. I couldn't get Max back right away. My mum acted like she'd done me a favour by handling the situation, while I wasn't there to get emotional about it. She said that ripping the band-aid off quickly was kinder than dragging out the inevitable separation. When I got angry and accused her of stealing my dog, she said that since we all lived in the same house, she had every right to make decisions about what animals could stay there. She claimed that my reaction proved I was too attached, and that losing the dog would be good for me. I was so heartbroken and angry that I could barely speak to my mum for weeks. Max had been my companion and source of comfort, and losing him felt like losing a family member. The fact that she'd taken him away while I wasn't there to say goodbye made it even more painful. I tried to adopt Max back as soon as the waiting period was over, but when I went to the shelter, they told me he'd already been adopted by another family. I'd lost him forever because of my mum's selfishness and complete disregard for my feelings. My mum seemed surprised that I was so upset for so long. She kept saying it was just a dog and that I'd get over it eventually. She couldn't understand why I was treating the loss of a pet like a real tragedy worthy of grief. She also got defensive when I accused her of being cruel and manipulative. She said she'd done what was best for the family and that I was being overdramatic about losing an animal that I'd only had for a few months. The relationship with my mum has never recovered from what she did to Max. I can't forgive her for taking away something I loved so much without any regard for my feelings or Max's well-being. She broke my trust in a way that feels irreparable. I've started making plans to move out as soon as I can afford it, because I don't want to live with someone who could be so callous about something that meant so much to me. The whole experience taught me that my mum doesn't respect my emotions or my ability to make decisions about my own life. Max was a good dog who deserved better than being bounced between homes because of one person's selfishness. I hope his new family appreciates him and gives him the stable, loving home he deserves. That story is absolutely heartbreaking and shows just how cruel some parents can be when they decide they don't want something in their house. Taking someone's beloved pet to the shelter while they're at work is beyond manipulative. It's genuinely evil. Max had already been surrendered once, and OP's mum inflicted that trauma on him again just because she decided dogs were inconvenient. The fake allergy excuse and financial complaints when OP was paying for everything themselves just shows how desperate she was to justify her heartless behaviour. OP will never forget what their mum did, and rightfully so. Moving on to another story about parents who think their social lives should take priority over their children's special occasions. My parents tried to control my wedding guest list. I'm 24 and I got engaged to my fiancé David 6 months ago. We've been together for 4 years and we're both really excited about planning our wedding. We decided to have a smaller ceremony with about 80 guests, focusing on the people who are most important to us. Since we're paying for the wedding ourselves, we thought we'd have complete control over the guest list. We made our list carefully, including close family, our best friends, and the people who have been most supportive of our relationship over the years. But when I showed my parents our preliminary guest list, they immediately started making demands about who else needed to be invited. My mum pulled out her own list of people she wanted to include, and it had over 40 names on it of people I barely knew. Most of the people on my mum's list were her work colleagues, neighbours, and distant relatives that I haven't spoken to in years. She insisted that all of these people needed to be invited because they'd been asking about my wedding and would be offended if they didn't receive invitations. I tried to explain that we were keeping the wedding small and intimate, and that inviting people I'm not close with would change the entire feel of our celebration. I said we'd rather have a meaningful gathering with our closest loved ones than a big party with acquaintances. My mum got upset and said I was being selfish and rude by not including people who cared about me. She claimed that weddings were about bringing families and communities together, not just celebrating the couple's relationship with their immediate circle. She also said that she'd been talking about my engagement with her friends and co-workers for months, and that they'd all expressed interest in attending the wedding. She made it sound like I'd be disappointing and embarrassing her if I didn't invite people she'd already been bragging to. My dad joined in with his own list of people he wanted included. He had business associates, golf buddies, and old family friends that he thought deserved invitations. He said that weddings were important networking opportunities and that inviting his professional contacts could benefit my career. When I pointed out that adding all their requested guests would nearly double our wedding size and cost, they said that was my problem to figure out. They suggested I find a cheaper venue or cut costs in other areas to accommodate the larger guest list they wanted. My mum started getting emotional and saying that she'd been dreaming about my wedding for years and had always imagined celebrating with all the important people in her life. She acted like my desire for a small wedding was crushing her long-held fantasies about the event. She also brought up weddings of other family members that had included large extended families and friend groups. She said that our family had always had big celebrations and that breaking with tradition would hurt people's feelings. My dad took a more aggressive approach and said that since they were my parents, they should have significant input on the guest list, regardless of who was paying. He claimed that weddings affect the whole family, not just the couple, and that their social relationships needed to be considered. He also started making threats about their level of participation in the wedding if their guest list demands weren't met. He said that if I wasn't going to include the people important to them, maybe they wouldn't be as involved in the celebration as they'd planned. The pressure escalated when my parents started contacting the people they wanted invited and telling them to save the date for my wedding. They were essentially issuing invitations without my permission and then using those conversations as evidence that these people were expecting to be included. My mum would say things like, "I already told Mrs. Johnson from work that she'd be getting an invitation, so now I have to invite her, or I'll look like a liar." She was creating social obligations that I'd never agreed to and then using them to guilt me into expanding the guest list. They also started criticising the people David and I had chosen to invite. They'd question why certain friends were important enough to include while their preferred guests were being excluded. They acted like our choices reflected poor judgment about relationships and priorities. When I stood firm about keeping our original guest list, my parents accused me of being ungrateful and inconsiderate. They said that after everything they'd done for me over the years, the least I could do was include the people they cared about in my wedding celebration. My mum started crying and saying that she felt like she wasn't important to me anymore, and that I was shutting her out of one of the most significant events of my life. She made my desire for an intimate wedding sound like a personal rejection of our family relationships. The situation came to a head when my parents threatened to boycott the wedding entirely if their guest list demands weren't met. They said that if I was going to exclude the people who mattered to them, then maybe they shouldn't attend either. This threat was obviously meant to force me into compliance, but it actually helped clarify things for me. I realised that my parents cared more about using my wedding as a social opportunity than about celebrating David's and my happiness. I told them that David and I were going to proceed with our original guest list and that they were welcome to attend and be part of our celebration, but that we weren't going to compromise our vision for the wedding to accommodate their social agenda. My parents were shocked that their ultimatum didn't work and accused me of being stubborn and selfish. They said I was making the biggest mistake of my life by prioritizing my own desires over family harmony. We ended up having our wedding with our original guest list of close friends and family. My parents did attend, but they spent the whole event making passive-aggressive comments about how small and disappointing it was compared to other weddings they'd been to. They also made sure to tell people about all the guests who hadn't been invited, creating drama and hurt feelings that we've been trying to avoid by keeping things intimate in the first place. The whole experience taught me that my parents see major life events as opportunities to advance their own social interests rather than celebrations of their children's happiness. They were more concerned about impressing their acquaintances than about what would make David and me feel loved and supported on our wedding day. That story perfectly captures how some parents think their child's wedding is actually about them and their social status. OP's mum literally started inviting people without permission and then used those fake obligations to guilt them into expanding the guest list. The threat to boycott their own child's wedding over not being able to invite work colleagues is just breathtaking in its selfishness. David and OP absolutely made the right choice, keeping their celebration intimate and meaningful instead of turning it into their parents' networking event. Let's move to another story about a parent who thought their child's hard-earned money was available for borrowing. My dad accused me of being ungrateful for not lending him money. I'm 22 and I've been working full-time since I graduated college last year. I have a decent job in marketing and I've been really careful about budgeting and saving money. I live in a small apartment and don't spend much on luxuries because I want to build up my savings and eventually buy a house. Over the past year, I've managed to save about $15,000, which I'm really proud of. It took discipline and sacrifice to put away that much money on an entry-level salary, but I wanted to establish a good financial foundation for my future. Last month, my dad called me and asked if we could meet for dinner because he needed to discuss something important with me. I thought maybe he wanted to talk about family plans or give me some advice about my career, so I was happy to spend time with him. But during dinner, he told me that he and my mum were having some serious financial problems. He explained that his business had been slow for several months and they were struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments and credit card bills. At first, I felt really bad for them and asked if there was anything I could do to help. I offered to pay for dinner and said I'd be happy to help them look at their budget or find resources for financial counselling. That's when my dad asked me for a loan. He said they needed $8,000 to catch up on their mortgage and avoid foreclosure proceedings. He promised they'd pay me back within 6 months once his business picked up again. I was shocked because $8,000 was more than half of my entire savings. I explained that lending them that much money would wipe out most of what I'd worked so hard to save and would set back my own financial goals significantly. My dad said he understood it was a lot of money, but that this was a family emergency and that family should help each other in times of crisis. He said that if the roles were reversed, he and my mum would do anything to help me avoid losing my home. I asked if there were other options they'd explored, like talking to their mortgage company about a payment plan or getting a loan from the bank. My dad said they'd tried those things, but that their credit wasn't good enough to qualify for traditional financing. He also said that borrowing from family was better than going to outside lenders because we could work out terms that were comfortable for everyone. He made it sound like lending them money was actually a smart financial move for me. When I hesitated and said I needed time to think about it, my dad's tone changed completely. He said he was disappointed that I would even need to consider helping my parents avoid losing their house. He acted like my reluctance was proof that I didn't care about family. He started listing all the ways he and my mum had supported me over the years, from paying for my education to helping me get started after college. He said that after everything they'd invested in me, the least I could do was help them when they were in trouble. I tried to explain that it wasn't about not wanting to help, but about the financial risk of lending such a large portion of my savings. I said that if something happened and they couldn't pay me back, I'd be in a terrible position financially. My dad got angry and accused me of being selfish and materialistic. He said that I was more concerned about my savings account than about my parents' well-being. He claimed that I'd changed since I started making money and that success had made me greedy. He also said that other children would be honoured to help their parents in a time of need and that most people would gladly sacrifice their savings to keep their families home. He made it sound like my reluctance was abnormal and heartless. When I continued to express concerns about the loan, my dad started making personal attacks. He said that I'd always been selfish and that he should have known better than to expect generosity from me. He claimed that I only cared about myself and my own financial security. The emotional manipulation escalated when he started talking about how stressed my mum was about their financial situation and how much this uncertainty was affecting her health. He said that I had the power to relieve their suffering, but was choosing not to because of my own greed. He also began questioning my financial priorities, saying that a young person didn't need to have so much money in savings. He acted like my careful budgeting and saving habits were signs of selfishness, rather than responsible financial planning. When I suggested that maybe I could lend them a smaller amount that wouldn't devastate my savings, my dad said that anything less than $8,000 wouldn't solve their problem. He said that partial help would just delay the inevitable, and that I might as well not help at all. The conversation ended with my dad saying he was ashamed of me, and that he never thought his own child would refuse to help when the family needed it most. He said that my mum would be devastated to learn that I'd turned down their request for help, and that our relationship might never recover from my selfishness. I left that dinner feeling terrible and conflicted. Part of me wanted to help my parents because I love them and don't want them to lose their house. But another part of me knew that lending them most of my savings was a huge financial risk that could set me back for years. I spent days agonizing over the decision and finally decided to offer them $3,000, which was as much as I could afford to lose if they couldn't pay me back. I thought this was a reasonable compromise that would help them while protecting my financial security. When I called my dad to make this offer, he was furious. He said that $3,000 was insulting and wouldn't make any meaningful difference in their situation. He accused me of trying to look generous while actually being stingy and unhelpful. He said that if I wasn't willing to give them the full amount they needed, then I obviously didn't understand the seriousness of their situation. He made my compromise offer sound like a slap in the face rather than a genuine attempt to help. My dad also started telling other family members about our conversation, painting me as the ungrateful daughter who refused to help her parents keep their home. He told them about my savings account and made it sound like I was hoarding money while my parents faced foreclosure. Several relatives called me to express disappointment in my decision and to try to convince me to reconsider. They'd clearly heard my dad's version of events and thought I was being unreasonably selfish by not lending the money. My grandmother was particularly upset and said she couldn't believe I'd let my parents lose their house when I had the means to help them. She said that in her day, children would do anything to help their parents, and that my attitude showed how spoiled my generation had become. The family pressure was overwhelming, but I stuck to my decision not to lend the full $8,000. I knew that losing more than half my savings would put me in a vulnerable financial position, and that there was no guarantee I'd ever be paid back. My parents did end up avoiding foreclosure, but they had to sell their house and move into a smaller rental property. My dad blamed me for this outcome and said that if I'd helped when they asked, they could have kept their home. He's barely spoken to me since then and makes passive-aggressive comments about how some children appreciate their parents, while others only care about money. He's turned my financial responsibility into evidence of my moral failure as a daughter. The whole experience has damaged our relationship permanently. My dad can't seem to forgive me for prioritizing my own financial security over his emergency, and I can't forgive him for trying to manipulate me into making a decision that could have ruined my future. I've realized that my dad sees my success and savings as resources that should be available to the family rather than achievements that belong to me personally. He expected me to sacrifice years of careful saving to solve problems that weren't my responsibility to fix. Some friends think I made the right choice by protecting my financial future, while others think I should have helped my parents regardless of the personal cost. I still wonder sometimes if I was too cautious, but I know that lending them that much money would have been financially devastating for me. That story hits hard because OP's dad used every manipulation tactic in the book to try to guilt them into handing over their life savings. The personal attacks, the family pressure campaign, and the blame for their financial problems afterward shows exactly what kind of person he really is. OP worked incredibly hard to save $15,000 on an entry-level salary, and their dad thought it should be available as his personal bailout fund. The fact that he's still punishing OP for making a responsible financial decision proves they absolutely made the right call. Here's another story about parents who thought their child's achievements were family property. My mum took my graduation gift. I'm 18 and I just graduated high school last month. My grades weren't perfect throughout school, but I really stepped up my game junior and senior year and managed to finish with a 3.8 GPA. I was proud of how much I'd improved, and my family seemed happy about my academic turnaround. My grandparents on my mum's side have always been really supportive of my education. They helped pay for school supplies when money was tight and always encouraged me to do my best in my classes. When I told them about my improved grades, they were thrilled. For my graduation, my grandparents gave me an incredible gift, a brand new laptop for college. It was a really nice MacBook Pro that cost around $2,000, way more expensive than anything I'd ever owned. They said they wanted to make sure I had the best possible tools for success in college. I was so grateful and excited about the laptop. I'd been using an ancient desktop computer that barely worked, so having a modern laptop would make such a huge difference for my college work. I spent the first few days after graduation setting it up and learning about all its features. But about a week after graduation, I came home from hanging out with friends to find my laptop gone from my room. I looked everywhere and couldn't find it anywhere in the house. I was starting to panic because I thought maybe we'd been robbed. When I asked my mum if she'd seen my laptop, she casually told me she'd sold it. She said she'd found a buyer online who was willing to pay $1,500 for it, and she thought that was too good of an offer to pass up. I was shocked and asked her why she would sell my graduation gift without even asking me. She said that we needed the money more than I needed such an expensive computer, and that I could just use the family computer for my college work. My mum explained that my dad had been out of work for 2 months, and they were behind on several bills. She said that selling the laptop would help them catch up on rent and utilities, and that keeping the family housed was more important than me having a fancy computer. I tried to explain that the laptop wasn't just expensive technology, it was a meaningful gift from my grandparents, who had specifically bought it to help me succeed in college. I said that selling it felt like betraying their generosity and trust. My mum said I was being dramatic and materialistic. She claimed that my grandparents would understand if they knew about our financial situation, and that they'd want their gift to be used to help the whole family rather than just me. When I pointed out that the laptop had been given specifically to me for my educational success, she said that helping the family stay stable would benefit my education more than having an expensive computer. She acted like selling my gift was actually doing me a favour. I asked if she'd even considered asking my grandparents for help with bills instead of selling the gift they'd given me. My mum said she was too proud to ask her parents for money, and that selling the laptop was a more dignified solution to their financial problems. She also said that since I was still living at home and not paying rent, she had every right to make decisions about expensive items in the house. She treated the laptop like it was family property rather than my personal graduation gift. When I got upset and said I wanted the laptop back, my mum said it was too late because she'd already completed the sale and spent the money on bills. She acted like my emotional reaction was proof that I was too attached to material possessions. I called my grandparents to tell them what had happened, and they were horrified. They said they'd given the laptop specifically to me for college, and that my mum had no right to sell it without my permission. They offered to buy me another laptop, but I felt terrible asking them to spend more money. My grandparents ended up confronting my mum directly about what she'd done. They told her that selling my graduation gift was inappropriate and hurtful, and that she should have asked them for help with bills instead of taking something that didn't belong to her. My mum got defensive and said that everyone was overreacting about a piece of technology. She claimed that she'd made a practical decision to help the family, and that getting so emotional about a laptop showed skewed priorities. She also said that my grandparents were spoiling me by giving such expensive gifts, and that learning to sacrifice for family was more important than having nice things. She tried to turn the whole situation into a lesson about values and responsibility. The family drama escalated when my mum accused my grandparents of undermining her authority as a parent and trying to buy my affection with expensive presents. She said that their gift-giving was making it harder for her to teach me about financial responsibility. My grandparents were so upset about the whole situation that they ended up buying me another laptop anyway, but they had it shipped directly to my dorm room at college instead of to our house. They said they didn't trust my mum not to sell this one too. My mum was furious when she found out about the replacement laptop and accused everyone of ganging up against her. She said that nobody appreciated the difficult position she'd been in and that she'd done what she thought was best for the family. The relationship between my mum and my grandparents has been damaged permanently by this incident. They don't trust her anymore, and they've started giving me gifts directly instead of through her. The whole family dynamic has changed because of what she did. I start college next month and I'm grateful that I'll have the laptop I need for my studies. But the whole experience has made me lose trust in my mum. The fact that she could sell something so meaningful to me without even discussing it shows how little she respects my feelings and property. I've also realised that I need to be more careful about keeping valuable items secure when I'm living at home. If my mum was willing to sell my graduation gift, she might take other things that are important to me if she decides the family needs money. The worst part is that she still doesn't seem to understand why everyone is so upset. She continues to act like she made a reasonable decision and that we're all overreacting to a simple financial transaction. She can't see how betraying and hurtful her actions were. That story is just infuriating because OP's mum literally stole and sold a meaningful graduation gift without permission. The grandparents specifically bought that laptop to help OP succeed in college, and she treated it like community property that she could liquidate whenever convenient. The complete lack of remorse and the attempts to justify theft as family sacrifice show she learned absolutely nothing from hurting everyone involved. Thank goodness the grandparents stepped up and made sure OP got what they needed for college, but the trust damage is probably permanent. Moving to our final story about parents who think sibling sharing extends to completely inappropriate situations. My parents forced me to share my bed with my little brother. I'm 16 and my little brother Danny is 8 years old. We've always shared a bedroom because our house only has 3 bedrooms and my parents have the master while my older sister has her own room. I was fine with sharing the room. We each had our own twin bed and our own space for clothes and belongings. But last month, Danny started having nightmares and would wake up crying several times a night. Instead of trying to figure out what was causing the nightmares or helping him learn to cope with them, my parents decided the solution was for him to sleep in my bed with me. At first, they said it would just be for a few nights until Danny felt more secure. They said that having his big brother nearby would help him feel safe and that the nightmares would probably stop once he wasn't sleeping alone. I wasn't thrilled about sharing my bed, but I felt bad for Danny and wanted to help him through whatever was scaring him. I figured a few nights of uncomfortable sleep was worth it if it helped my little brother feel better. But the few nights turned into a few weeks, and my parents showed no signs of working on a more permanent solution. Danny seemed comfortable sleeping in my bed and wasn't having as many nightmares, so they decided this arrangement was working fine. I started getting frustrated because I wasn't sleeping well with Danny in my bed. He moves around a lot in his sleep, kicks and takes up way more space than you'd expect from an 8-year-old. I was constantly tired because I wasn't getting good rest. I also felt like I had no privacy anymore. My bed had been the one place in our shared room that was completely mine, and now even that space was being shared with my little brother. I couldn't even go to bed early or sleep in late without coordinating with Danny's schedule. When I talked to my parents about finding a different solution, they said that the current arrangement was working well and they didn't want to disrupt it. They pointed out that Danny was sleeping better and the whole family was getting more rest because he wasn't crying in the middle of the night. I suggested that maybe Danny could sleep on an air mattress in my parents' room temporarily, or that we could set up a sleeping bag on the floor of our room so he could still be near me without actually sharing my bed. My parents said those solutions were too complicated and uncomfortable for Danny. They also said that siblings sharing beds was completely normal and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. They claimed that in many families, kids share beds all the time and that I should be grateful to have a close relationship with my brother. When I pointed out that there was a perfectly good empty bed in our room, Danny's own bed, they said he was too scared to sleep alone and that forcing him back to his own bed would probably bring back the nightmares. I asked if they'd considered taking Danny to see a counsel or to see if there was something deeper causing his fears, but they said that therapy was expensive and unnecessary when they'd already found a solution that worked. My mum said that asking an 8-year-old to sleep alone when he was having nightmares was cruel, and that as his older brother, I should want to help him feel safe and secure. She made it sound like my desire to have my own bed back was selfish and uncaring. The situation got worse when I started falling asleep in class because I was so tired from not sleeping well at night. My teachers noticed and called home to ask if everything was okay. Instead of reconsidering the sleeping arrangement, my parents got annoyed that I'd somehow made this a school issue. They told me I needed to adjust better to sharing my bed and that complaining about it was making things harder for everyone. They said that plenty of kids around the world share beds with siblings and that I was being spoiled by wanting my own sleeping space. When I pointed out that Danny had his own perfectly good bed just a few feet away from mine, they said that wasn't the point. They claimed that the physical closeness of sharing a bed was what made Danny feel secure, not just being in the same rooms. I also started noticing that this arrangement was affecting other aspects of my life. I couldn't have friends over as easily because there wasn't really space for anyone to hang out in my room when Danny's stuff was spread across both beds. I felt like I was losing my independence and personal space entirely. The worst part was when my parents started treating this temporary solution like it was permanent. They stopped talking about it as something they were working on fixing and started referring to it as just how our family did things now. When I brought up that I was a teenager who needed privacy and my own space, they said that family was more important than personal comfort and that I should be proud to be such a caring big brother. They completely dismissed my legitimate needs. As a growing adolescent, I tried talking to my older sister about the situation, hoping she might help me convince our parents to find a different solution. But she just said she was glad it wasn't her problem and that I should stop complaining about helping family. The breaking point came when I realised that Danny wasn't even having nightmares anymore, but my parents still insisted he needed to sleep in my bed. It had become a habit and convenience for them rather than addressing any actual problem Danny was having. When I refused to let Danny sleep in my bed one night and made him sleep in his own bed, my parents were furious. They said I was being cruel to a little kid and that my selfishness was going to traumatise my brother. Danny cried and said he was scared to sleep alone, but I noticed he fell asleep just fine in his own bed once the drama died down. The nightmares didn't come back, which proved that he didn't actually need to share my bed anymore. My parents grounded me for a week for refusing to help family and forced me to apologise to Danny for being mean to him. They said that until I learned to put family first, I'd continue to face consequences for my selfish behaviour. I've been sleeping on the floor of our room ever since because I refuse to share my bed anymore. But my parents won't let Danny move back to his own bed either. They'd rather have me sleep on the floor than admit their solution was inappropriate and unnecessary. The whole situation has made me realise that my parents don't respect my need for personal space and privacy as a teenager. They're willing to sacrifice my comfort and sleep indefinitely rather than address the actual root of Danny's fears or find a more appropriate solution. I can't wait to turn 18 and move out because living in a house where I don't even have the right to my own bed has become unbearable. I love my little brother, But being forced to share a bed with him for months has damaged our relationship and made me resentful of something that should never have been my responsibility to fix. That story ends there. The complete disregard for a teenager's need for personal space and privacy is just mind-boggling. Making OP sleep on the floor rather than put an 8-year-old back in his perfectly good bed shows these parents have lost all sense of appropriate boundaries. Danny stopped having nightmares, proving the bed sharing was never actually necessary. It just became a convenient way for the parents to avoid dealing with the real issue. No teenager should have to sacrifice their own bed indefinitely because their parents can't be bothered to help their younger child work through temporary fears. If you enjoyed these stories tonight, consider subscribing for more as I read Reddit stories just like these every evening. For now, take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.